agenda this morning, I think Phil is going to, Phil will be here in a few minutes, and I guess Louis will be here. But the way we wanted to actually work the agenda this morning is that first, Phil is going to go through a multi-year budget that we put together. So we'll do that first. I believe it's a 3-year budget, so we'll take a look at that first and ask what questions we might have on that. Louis was going to go through his comparison of the DIRG comparison of district size versus administrators that he sent around. I sent around an email just summarizing the result, and everyone got those so that you can analyze it a little bit more reasonably. Then we're going to finish going through the tabs here, asking questions, and then finally, simply because of the fact that there's still a lot of questions to be answered, I want to end the meeting where we can actually prioritize those questions that still need to be answered, because, you know, after today, while the administration is still going to be working on providing answers to our questions, we quickly want to move to really analyzing and discussing solutions for the rest of the month. And if we can, do that, we can, while some of the other questions are being answered, that would be great. So I think it's important that we prioritize the big questions. And so I want to kind of end the meeting that way. We have a hard stop at 12 o'clock today. So Phil is not here yet. So maybe Louis, do you want to go through the
Phil, I thought you said
Phil is not here. Phil is he sent an email around. He's resting. I mean, it seems like pneumonia is not completely gone, so he needs to be home and resting for the next couple of days. Phil's here, so maybe we can start off with that and then go through the administrative comparison that you sent around, Louis.
Okay. Do you want me to, I have some other documents as well responding to some other information. I can give that whenever you like.
Okay.
But I can talk about the chart I sent, or whatever you like.
Yeah, you can talk about, well, Phil, do you want to?
You
want to do the multi-year?
Sure. I mean, we can start with that one.
Yeah. Let's kind of do the multi-year first.
So Phil, maybe you could just talk about how you developed this and share some of the details on this sheet that's projecting out into the next few years.
All right. Everyone has a copy?
Yep.
So as we've mentioned over the past few sessions that this year is really an anomaly year in terms of the percentage increase that we have. A lot of it has to do with a few ads that we have. That we had late into 20 and going forward. So this multi-year pretty much takes us from where we would end FY21 and kind of just project out in terms of staff and in all the other contractual increases that we are aware of. And as you can see, really, we kind of level out in the low 3% in terms of an increase going from FY22 through 23. In addition to this, I also want to share one other thing in terms of the staff and based on the Malone and McGroom projection. So I'm sorry, this is the first time everyone is really seeing this.
Right.
So what I did here was pretty much just took the Malone and McBroom projection, just put it out just on the same time period. So as you guys will see, unfortunately at the West, we do have the West going on by pretty much one section for the next 3 years, and we do have a leveling out at Hurlbut. So the projection assumes that we will lose one position over the net of 3 positions in the next 3 years, which is also factored into the projection going into FY23. Just take a minute for you, everyone, just to digest everything here and see if we have any questions or clarifying anything that needs to be clarified.
Bill, did Malone and McBroom ever get back to you in terms of just kind of talking about, because looking at the 23 projection, it's if we believe in the enrollment, right, in terms of how Weston is going to increase. Did they give you any further data in terms of how it compares to Fairfield County, with Fairfield County decreasing, but yet with Weston increasing?
So I know that you did raise a question. I think Bill was going to reach out to them. I know in their presentation they did go in depth in terms of how things were.
Yeah.
But I do not have any
Okay.
further explanation at this time.
So the FY22 budget is minus the head count that you have in here, is that?
That is correct.
Okay.
How much headcount do you, I mean, this just has, what do you anticipate
So-
other than what's here in terms of
So-
headcounts?
In terms of headcounts, going into FY22, we're projecting to be down 2
Across the entire district?
across, well, only looking at 2 schools, at the lower schools, based on the class sizes and everything else.
Right, but that's only half of our, that's
That
only
is
half
correct.
of our
I'm-
staffing headcount.
Well, that is correct. I mean, I didn't have time to really.
Well, I can explain that. So
Please.
enrollment, the only way you reduce headcount is when the staffing, when the enrollment is enough to trigger a section going down.
Correct.
So I'm assuming those FTE you're showing are elementary FTE based on enrollment change.
That is correct.
The higher levels still haven't seen the level of reduction, obviously, that wave is going through. So what happens is, we can't, I mean, and I think everyone knows this, if we reduce 20 students, that doesn't mean it's necessarily in the same, enough to trigger a section. So
No.
the higher level, I don't anticipate
Yeah.
going down in FTE yet.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly reasonable to assume. It's just that this is probably half the staffing picture, right? Because
Right, it just won't show any change at the higher
it
level.
won't show any change across the shared services, meaning,
Well, there will be some minor FTE changes in specials.
minor.
Right, so what happens is, if you go down, let's say our WIS enrollment goes down,
Right,
okay? What happens is we then can reduce not only a classroom section, but a partial FTE, not a full FTE of art, PE, you know, those kind of things. And then what happens is, we have shared the teachers, the FTE is down in that building, but staff may be reduced district-wide because there may be more senior teachers at the elementary level, and you may actually see a middle school staff person
right.
take the hit on the FTE. However, the FTE is still reducing in that building.
Right. That's fine, but outside, you really didn't consider any staffing changes outside the building?
No, we did not.
That's what
I
I'm
think
saying.
that's gonna be a part of maybe a larger discussion, and we have not had that discussion as yet. So
Okay.
this was primarily based on the school, based on enrollment,
So everything else being the same?
everything,
and-
assuming
and
everything is
Everything
constant.
stays the same, and it's an enrollment-based analysis?
That is correct.
And just looking at the buildings, but not outside the buildings?
That is correct.
Okay.
And
Just so I
looking
know
at
the
the-
assumption.
And looking at the buildings, the Weston Middle School, how do we explain from 2019 to 2023 enrollment in the middle school dropping 27 students and there being no
So-
change?
Once again, at the middle school,
I'm seeing Weston Middle School from 580 to 553.
I mean, as Louis mentioned, it could very well be that there will be an adjustment. I haven't had the chance, I didn't have the chance to speak with Dan and just develop in terms of the sections and how all this will play out.
It's a much more complex picture.
Yeah,
than
Correct.
the
The middle
school.
and high
Because
school.
it's not just a home
Right,
home
it's
rec.
because
Correct.
of the teaming
Exactly.
methodology, it there was an analysis done at some point in the
Yeah.
not too distant past where we looked at the tipping point of when we could modify our teaming structure, and that's when we would get FTE reductions.
Yeah.
Louis?
Correct, I
Ken
can
would know
speak to
that.
that, so,
Yeah.
you know, when I look at those numbers for, FY '23, total enrollment of 553 and section sizes in the mid-180s, you know, you're looking at, you're really looking at like 8 sections of grade level, which is, you know, currently, we're proposing 8, 9, and 9 this year. So, there would need to be some, restructuring of the teaming model at the middle school. You know, so, but the macro view is that you're probably looking at some reductions, obviously, at the middle school over time. What those are on the micro level, we have to talk about how the teaming structure, can support the learning the way we want it to, but certainly we need to change over time.
Would there be benefit to recirculating the memo that was done, just
Sure.
to help educate the
Yeah.
newer board members on the intricacies of the teaming model staffing and the implications of various headcounts on that?
Yes, and, we have that, we can get that out to you very quickly.
I think this is a good start. I mean, it's basically, the assumptions are staffing through salary based on, you know, it's a contractual view of wages and benefits, with tweaking staffing based on enrollment. And it seems like the other changes are also, in facilities, which some are contractual, some are not. I think that, you know, my view, it's a start, right? I think probably if we really want to develop a budget, you know, a multi-year view, I think it also needs to include strategy as well, which I know we don't have time
Correct.
to do, because I think that once you include strategy, any multi-year views on how we can become more efficient with our staffing, because that's really why you do a multi-year budget, so you can actually look over time how you can actually migrate to something that you feel where you can create capacity to put more resources into the things that we care about.
Correct.
So I think this is actually a start, but I think we probably over time need to probably look at this a little bit deeper to just start developing multi-year strategies to go in line with the multi-year views.
Right, and what I think, we're seeing here is, you know, this year, obviously, is very different than what we've seen in the past, and potentially what we would have going forward. Now, what is not additionally shown here is any fluctuations due to sped, which are unknown,
Right.
obviously, and some other factors which we can delve into. But I think it is good to see year 2 and year 3 down the road. There are potentially some opportunities too, when you know, we haven't really looked at the middle and high school.
And just a clarifying question, as you said, obviously, certain sped expenses are not included in here. Transportation is not included in this number at all because it is very individual, so that's, just wanna be clear that that is not in here at all.
Out of district, transportation is not, in-district transportation is included.
Okay. Thank you.
You will.
I think it's obviously no way to predict
Right.
special education costs. I mean, it's completely,
I just wanna
other than knowing who we have
Right.
year to year and trying to anticipate outplacements and needs going to the next year. But even that, as we've seen over and over again, is iffy.
Yeah, I think this is good, like I said, it gives us a high-level view of kind of what you're.
Correct, so, and again, the question was actually, where would we be based on where we are? And
Right.
the multi-year was developed with that in mind, not taking everything else that you just mentioned into consideration.
Right. I think that, I'm sure there's a lot of questions about this, but I would propose that we actually move back to discussing the budget. We have a lot to do still on this year, so let's, maybe Louis could take us through some of the answers to some of the questions that he either sent around or has.
Right, so the one that was
in
sent,
advance as well.
the one that was sent to you by Meredith on Friday, is an analysis and it's a sort of a taking it all together in one thing analysis. So basically, we took total students per district, total numbers of administrators per district, and then came up with a students per administrator analysis. Bill had said a couple board members had asked for this, so we wanted to make everyone it's available to everyone. So it is broken into two pieces. One is the top section, which is the central office administrators. Not just cabinet, there's a couple pieces in there, like for instance, our director of facilities is in there. That's not a cabinet position, but we consider a central office position. And at the higher level, at the central office positions, all the districts have either 6 or 7 or 6, with the exception of ER9, which has 5. ER9 doesn't have a director of technology. It does not have a facilities director. And ER9, as you may know, is not actually one district. It's 3 very small districts combined into one group. They're not officially one district, although I anticipate that will happen eventually. But for now, they also have two special education positions, 2 positions for director. One is for Easton and Reading, and one is for Region 9. They used to have 3, one for each, but now it's combined into 2. Also, the human resources position, it is a cabinet position, though it is not a person who, it's not the same level of position. So but it is part of their cabinet, and they do hold it out that way. So that's human resources manager. Other than that, all the districts basically have the same positions, with the exception of Buchanan and Darien, which also have a director of visual and performing arts in Buchanan, and in Darien, she's not popping up immediately. Unfortunately, the spread.
Director of music.
Yeah, thank you, director of music. And so that's the central office piece. And then below, you'll see in a separate block the number of building administrators. And what we did is we put all the PPS, other than the head PPS person, the special ed personnel services person, in the buildings. So we have 2 assistant directors. Darien has 2 program directors for PPS. There's various types of titles, but they're essentially all the same thing. And then, what we are is we're the smallest district in Durgay. The second smallest combined district is ER9. The rest of them are all considerably larger. Wilton's the next closest. We have approximately 2,300 students. They have 3,800 students. So that's what this analysis is. As far as our average number obviously is also the lowest, given of administrators per student. We are the smallest district, and when you run an independent school district, you still have administrators. So at the central office level, we're right in line with everybody else. The building level, we are also right in line with everyone else. The difference is we're smaller, so you're going to have a smaller number of pupils per administrator. Also, that's also what drives your higher cost per pupil as well. So if you're still running a district, you still have kids. Now, we obviously have fewer teachers, which isn't in this analysis, but ultimately you still have to staff everything. It's with the price of, unfortunately, running an independent school district. So that is what this is, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I have a question. The conundrum here is that, the administrative function is expected to scale, right? I mean, so you build capacity, but you can handle with the same administrative structure, 2,200 students, 2,600 students, probably 3,000 students.
That's correct.
It scales, right? And we don't have the economies of scale to actually be able to, we're not gonna grow into a number.
Oh, no.
No, it's
the nature of being a small district.
Yeah, it's the nature of being a small district, and so we don't benefit from any economies of scale.
No.
In fact, there's 2 things. All the districts mimic the same hierarchical structure, regardless of their size, right? And so there's no uniqueness really in thinking out of the box on whether you're a large district or a small district in terms of efficiencies about how you actually administer the district, because everyone looks at the same function district by district regardless of size. And so what happens is that in larger districts like Westport, you'll basically have, you benefit from the economies of scale, and in smaller districts like ours, you don't, right?
That's exactly right, and this is one of the issues that came about with the governor's proposal last year about trying to force regionalization because of exactly that issue. And then, obviously the analysis is, well, where you really save. You save, a small portion of your budget, which is some of your central office administration, but you get one superintendent, for instance.
Right.
But when you start building into larger districts, that becomes less significant because you still have the same buildings, you still have the same kids. And the number of students doesn't affect how much curriculum you need, or finance operations, or human resources. I mean, it doesn't change that. So the problem is, and this is part of the overall discussion that your community is having, which is, can we pay for this? But that's what you have. You
Right.
have a small district that needs to run itself, and that's part of the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, historically, you go back 15 years, we plus or minus had, regardless of our size, we plus or minus had pretty much same structure.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, 2005, which is 15 years ago, right? It was the same structure.
Right.
The only difference is we added a assistant director, and we added the assistant director sped positions over the last 8 years or so.
Right.
That's the only difference, and that's because of the changing need of sped. The very much the workload change, and we were understaffed given the needs of students in this district. So that's the only change. As far as the cabinet level positions, it is exactly the same. Yeah. And the building positions as well.
Any other questions? Is there anything else?
Yes, if I could hand out some stuff. So, we're working on, as you know, other stuff, but one thing we did have that was readily available to give you was CES did an analysis for, I have the superintendents for this year, the comparisons of all their compensation, as well as the compensation for all of the central office positions in Lower Fairfield County. Now, I should point out, as you know, some of these are not comparable districts, but all of the Durgays are in here, so you'll have that information to look at. It's coming around, but it shows salaries, who gets annuities, other compensation, the high being the superintendent of Buchanan, who this year is making $348,569, and the low for Durgay being, I believe, ER9, of course, at $228,988. And having had my kids go through ER9, I would not necessarily look at that as a comparable, but I would say that's the spread. Now, there are other districts in here. You have Bridgeport in there. Believe it or not, the Bridgeport superintendent only makes $200,000 a year. You have the CES director and so forth and so on. Westport at $309. So that's the comparables for the superintendents. It has everything down to life insurance, long-term disability. All the data is here, just collected by CES. Vacation time. Wow.
What tends to be the other?
Other?
Because some
So,
of those are big numbers.
yeah, so in Greenwich, that's a housing allowance, traditionally. Not sure what Fairfield is. And New Canaan, that new other is new this year. We don't know where that came from. That's what drove the number up so high, the 37,000. But normally it's either a housing allowance, or something similar to that. The auto is separate, as you can see, that's listed. So I'd have to do a little more digging to find out what those big numbers are, but I know
No, it's okay, I just.
Greenwich is
thought-
housing. That's a
That
housing
makes
And
allowance.
they've had a history of offering housing allowance.
Oh,
Yeah,
long
lots of
history.
long
Yeah,
history.
that's been part of the Greenwich package for a long time.
How do we handle, vacation and personal leave? Is there a payout at the end of the year, or is it a rollover, or is it use
I don't
it,
know what
use it?
So, for everyone except the superintendent, it's all uniform. So all of the central office administrators get 25 vacation days. We can roll over 5. If we don't use them, they're lost. There's no payout. Sick time is cumulative. So we get 18 sick days a year. If we don't use them, they roll over and they accumulate. But there's no payout of that at the end either. The superintendent, I have to look at Bill's contract, but I know under Colleen's contract, it was turned into 30 vacation days instead of 25, 5 of which could be paid out at the end of the year if they weren't used. I honestly don't know if that's in Bill's contract, but none of the central office people have that anymore.
Questions?
Okay.
And just to understand all the columns,
Yeah.
the total superintendent expense, 630.19.
Experience. So one of the statistical points that we wanted to put in, total superintendent experience, local superintendent experience, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what local is.
Number of years in the current position.
In the current position, thank you, Ken. So what's their experience in that position? So let's go to Weston. So Bill has been here, as of last year for 3 years. He's been a superintendent for 7. So that's what that is. And that's irrelevant too, and we have similar data, not on this chart, but that we've provided to the board in the past where we've shown the same for the central office positions, because that affects compensation. So over time, if you're here longer, you obviously have the cumulative effect of salary increases. So if you're in a district for 10 years, you're gonna have a higher salary than a person maybe who just started unless he matched the salary. Those comparative numbers are all contained in the next document I give you, but it doesn't have the years experience in it. This one does. This is very detailed.
Thank you.
Would you like the next one?
Sure,
Okay.
let's keep going.
So the next one is what I was describing. This is CES's analysis of all of the, it's not in any particular, it's in alphabetical order, it's not in any particular comparison of compensation. There you go, right, thanks. And this basically has the title of the position and the district and the salary. So I can manipulate this, and they gave me the wrong data, so I can manipulate this, but as they initially provided, it's just in alphabetical order. And it has the title, but it doesn't break down the pieces of the compensation. So for instance, my compensation, the salary is about 10,000 less than the total because of my legal services stipend, which is a little over $10,000. So this is total compensation for all of these positions.
This is also, this is also going to be a little bit distorted by years in the job. as
Yes,
well,
and-
but that's, yeah,
And we have an analysis that we did this spring,
yeah,
when that was presented to the negotiating committee to determine our compensation,
Right.
which has that in it.
yeah.
So you'll see some people who've been around longer are gonna have a little bit higher salary than
Yeah.
someone in another district, just because that's the way it goes. Sometimes depending on the seniority of the person you're hiring, you may have to match the compensation. But if you get someone newer, you're able to offer maybe less compensation because they have less experience.
Mhm.
And that analysis that we did was just dirt gay. This is the whole lower Fairfield County Superintendent's group.
Is there a mix of over time, right, this is not a specific question, over time, in terms of a tenure base versus a goal setting base increases, like,
No.
in terms of the model, right? Is it-
Right. Just explain a little further what you mean.
Well, I'm
Right.
just taking notes, and I see, well, because of tenure, you have the escalation, so is the model hybrid with some element of objective setting, or?
Oh, no, so, yeah, good question. So, well, first of all, there's no tenure built into it. There's tenure not in the legal sense, but in the classic sense of how long you've been here, which is, I think, what you meant. The traditionally, for the last 8 years, maybe 9, the year after I came here, it changed, the compensation increases for your central office administration have been pegged exactly to the Weston Administrative Association contract. That wasn't something that was bargained for or anything, it's just what the board has chosen to do year after year. So there's no connection of that to any sort of merit or goal achievement or anything. That's never happened. Prior to that, there was an informal process where there were sort of incentive increases given to certain people based on how well they did that year. That was all, but that wasn't part of a specific process. That also predated me. The first year that happened was the year I got here, and it was based on the prior year's work. So, to answer your question, no, it's just been pegged exactly to law year after year. But that's not, again, that's just what the board's done. It's not part of a formal agreement or anything.
Okay.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you.
Louis, would you mind sending,
Yeah.
both of these digitally?
It'll all be
So-
sent digitally with a cover sheet, just like we did the other ones, and it'll all be posted the
And
same
can
way.
you send them in Excel so that we can, if I need to send them by
the
prompt,
only
reorder
issue-
them?
The only issue might be the superintendent's one, I think, is a PDF, but that's short.
That's
The-
easy.
the-
No,
the
this
other
one
one
in
is in
an
Excel.
Excel would be really helpful.
I have it in Excel.
Thank
You will absolutely do that.
There's no other questions. Gonna move back to the tabs, and I guess we will start with athletics. Yeah,
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Well, it may not be quick, but, sorry. I guess with all the information we've seen this morning, and thank you, Cabinet, for pulling all this together. It's painting a picture that a small school district is more expensive than a bigger school district,
Yes.
in a very summary statement. Could our building level administrators, cabinet officers that are here, what's the benefit of that to our students? What's the benefit of that to our taxpayers? I mean, that's the big question we have to answer. I mean, so, I just feel like we've got all this information. It tells the story that I think anybody in Weston has known. This school district is more expensive to run than a larger school district because we don't have the economies of scale. But what's the benefit of that? I mean, I think that's the key question. I think we've got our athletic director, we've got 2 principals, we've got the cabinet members. What do we get for that?
It's a good question, Gina, and let me start and then the team will chime in. I think one of the things that Weston has done to set itself apart from other districts is the level of personalization. When you think about this campus, all 4 schools, on one campus plus your central office, there's a level of personalization here you don't see in other places. The high school principal knows every student as they walk in the door. Part of that is Lisa, but the scale allows that. The level of personalization from a curricular standpoint, the program studies, being able to respond to the needs of our students in ways that help them meet their individual goals and potential, and shape our curriculum around that. I think athletically, the number of opportunities that our students have here, where in a larger district they may be cut from a team because there aren't enough spots. There's a level of personalization that I think that is unmatched in Fairfield County. Maybe a reason why adds to the reason why families are attracted here. Others?
You guys start.
The other thing is, the consistency, you know, certainly moving from school to school, where all the transitions are smoother, where you're following the same curriculum, you know what's coming from, what they're coming from, what you're going to. Where in other schools, they could be in totally different math programs, in 5 different elementary schools, where I know what the elementary school's doing, what we're doing, it's just a smoother transition. And the conversations are, I mean, in addition to the fact that we're all in the same schoolroom, but we talk constantly. So, in addition to the personalization, I mean, I know every child's name in my school, and so does Nicole, and we're already starting with meetings to talk about second graders who will be coming up next year. So I think there's a lot more, we really know our kids. We're able to provide for them.
Ken touched athletically. There are opportunities that are provided here in Weston that wouldn't be in a bigger school district. There are some programs who do cut and have to cut due to space and just the quantity of athletes who want to participate in that sport. But there are many that don't cut, and you won't find that in some bigger schools. And we have, I would say consistently every year, we have juniors and seniors who say, I want to try this. And they come out on a team and they're able to play it. You wouldn't be able to do that at a big school. You know, and I could think of a bunch right off the top of my head, but you know, it's a great opportunity for them because we're a smaller school, and you know, obviously the talent pool is a little bit smaller, that they can just go out and try something that they haven't played since they were 10 years old and compete at a high school level with that. So it's pretty unique.
Okay, I'll speak. The way I see it also is that, you know, when you talk about personalization and you talk about personalization with the students, then that's, you know, that's key. It's the through line to the classroom and the co-curricular programs. But the other thing that oftentimes when you have a larger school, you have assistant principals that are assigned certain roles, and that is the only role that he or she does. For example, this is your sense. For example, our assistant principals have been, we've tried to cross-train them in everything, and this is actually one of the years where, for example, Ms. Cavoni is really learning how to schedule the school, which is very complicated. She's been kind of on the fringes of working with him, and now Matt is, you know, she's enmeshed, I guess I would say, in the process, and vice versa. So then Matt is really looking at the course registration piece. When we have, you know, there's some assistant principals in these larger schools, for example, that, okay, you're the assistant principal for special ed, and you kind of oversee a lot of the stuff that goes on with special ed, if there's an assistant director also. Or you're the one that, I remember going to this one school, and, he handles all the daily operations. All right, good, like the custodians and opening the building and this and that, but when you have that kind of thing, you don't, I think, have the perspective of an instructional team, and we're supposed to be instructional leaders. And so with our structure, everyone, and maybe it's because of the size or the way we set it up, it sort of comes together like this, and not, well, these are the jobs for this assistant principal and that assistant principal, this person does this, and oh, go to this person about, everyone knows pretty much what's going on. Yes, there's accountability with some specific tasks, but it's important that that level of personalization also crosses, I think, the staff and the systems of how we run things, so that everyone is kind of informed. If Julie's not here and she's on the safety committee, we need to know what's going on with that. It's not just, oh, wait till she gets back. So I think that that's a strength of a smaller system, and the strength of how the systems kind of merge together with the different roles to create this kind of learning environment that, you know, we are very proud of.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, Mike, you have a unique experience as far as being very recently from a larger district, and managing pupil personnel services, which gets to the very heart of taking care of our students. What are the differences you see between large district doing this and a small district doing this?
I mean, people have touched on it already, but I can give specific examples if necessary. But the individualization and personalization is very much a strength of this district, and not something that necessarily exists in a larger district. We are able to make individual accommodations and decisions for kids based on who we are and the fact that we can get it done very quickly. And there's not necessarily the amount of discussion and, you know, quote unquote red tape that needs to go along with all of those things. That we can make those decisions, we can find people to get the job done and do it. And I think that speaks to a second thing, is just, you know, the response time and the proactive nature of what we can provide here, what we do provide here. Look, this is a high-performing community. Our kids, our parents, it's a very, you know, it's a very high-performing group, and people expect answers, rightfully so. They expect answers. They expect, you know, responses to questions. They expect actions to address situations, and we're able to do that. That's not necessarily different than a large district, but what is different is the fact that, at least from my experience, we get things done very quickly here. We move very quickly, and I know that may not necessarily seem the case because it is still education, but perhaps I'll just qualify that within education we're moving very quickly, because I can give a specific example of that. I mean, the dialectical behavior therapy work that we did, we went from introduction to having it fully integrated into our health curriculum in like 7 months. I mean, that's really, really fast. And it's a tremendous benefit to our kids. And it's those kinds of things, that's just an example that I have, I mean, and there's probably others, but those are the kinds of things that, because of our structure, because of our size, because of, you know, as Lisa said, the involvement that many different people have, you know, in all parts of the puzzle, we're able to move and we're able to get things done. So that is a difference. You know, it's not necessarily something that I've seen in larger places.
Right. There's one other really important aspect. And it involves the staff. So, you know, one of the things we were talking about is the number of administrators per student. Well, that's important, but what's also important is the number of administrators per staff. In a larger district that has larger schools and the same number of building administrators, you don't necessarily have the same level of evaluation that's going on of our staff, and certified staff in particular. So we have one assistant principal at each elementary school. I can tell you from observing for a long time the operations of those two schools, I honestly don't know how they would operate with just a principal or even a part-time assistant principal, although I understand that that is something that we had in the past and that may very well be up for discussion. But when it comes to the quality of the observations of the teachers and the feedback that's given and our ability to hold teachers who are struggling accountable and ultimately improve their practice, that is the critical work of those building administrators. They're the people on the front line. So they have fewer teachers to evaluate. And I can tell you, it's still a huge workload. So I can't even imagine how an administrator who has a larger number of teachers, significantly larger, is going to be able to do it at the level we are. The other thing is we have multiple, I don't remember how years ago, Ken might remember, the state passed a mandatory teacher evaluation plan. We have an exception to that, an exemption. We have our own plan, which I would argue is more complicated and better than the state plan. And that has to be administered or we're not in compliance with the state requirements. So having the smaller school allows for that. Now, with that said, at the elementary level, one analysis we did was, at what point can you go without a assistant principal? And no, other than Ridgefield, which has these shared sort of elementary supervisors, no district doesn't have an assistant principal with a school of 400 or more students. Now, in Ridgefield, they have much smaller elementary schools, and they have multiple ones that are shared because they're very small student populations. But ultimately, Staples, for instance, which is a larger school, has 4 assistant principals. All the elementary schools in Westport have 2 assistant principals. Now, those assistant principals, one of them is dedicated to special education. I know Mike held that position a long time ago, but still evaluates. So the benefit we have of being smaller is we're able not only focus on the kids, but focus on the needs of the staff and holding people accountable, which I can tell you, having worked in Danbury, we do a much better job of because we have fewer staff to work with. So there is an advantage there too, is we're able to hold our staff accountable and more importantly, give them the proper professional guidance to continue to do good work. So that's another element of being small. So yes, it's more money.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can start with athletics.
Okay. Well, our athletic department is continuing to succeed at an extremely high level. Our athletes amaze me every year, and it's fun to talk about what they do and what our coaches accomplish every year. When you can look back and you know, that it kind of pops that there are schools in our state that haven't won 5 or 6 state championships in their histories as long as they've been around. And over the last 14 years, we're averaging almost 6 state championships a year and over 6 conference championships a year. It's pretty impressive what the athletes do. And we, you know, obviously we try to do that as physically responsibly as we can. One of the areas we can demonstrate that is the fact that our supplies line has gone up once in the 14 years that I've been here as the athletic director. So obviously the cost of those supplies and the cost of shipping those supplies goes up every year. And our numbers as far as participation goes has stayed pretty constant, right around the 65 to 70% of our student population participating in at least one sport. And if you count the athletes more than once, then we're obviously well over 100% of our students. Next year, I can look it up, it's right around the 900 students, I believe we were expecting for next year. 930 that we're anticipating as far as athletes go. Again, if you count them, if they do 2 sports, they would count twice, or 3 sports, they would count 3 times. Overall, the big drivers in the athletic budget usually are insurance, although that came down quite a bit this year, which was a nice surprise. Thank you, Phil, for that. Officials, the payment of officials and transportation are probably the 2 most constant drivers, and coaches' salaries in the athletic budget. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just a quick question, Phil had raised this, I can't remember when, but am I doing the math right here on page 83?
You should, if you go, you're doing vertical, and it's going horizontal. That's why you have that difference. So in terms of where the math is, in terms of what the percentage, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Right, so if you do, it's really line by line.
And what I'm referring to is the percentage increase in the last column. Okay, so it shouldn't add up vertically as well?
No, it's not
Okay.
going to.
That's the one I don't know. Okay, thank you. So,
Alright. I have a related question, which is that on page 82, your FTE is 0.93. Is that incorrect? And then it's really 1.93, right? And then your increase is 1.90 on 83, but it's 0.93. Can you just explain this to me?
I'm sorry, one more time?
So on page 82, it looks like your total FTE is 0.93, but it's really not, isn't it?
It's 1.9.
Okay, so that's, okay. And then on, so it says athletic director, so there's 2 athletic directors and an administrative assistant, is that correct?
No.
What page?
Page.
What page are you on?
I was just on 83, so is there just 1 athletic director?
Yes,
There is.
exactly.
So I should cross off on the.
Well,
feel
the
like it's
athletic
Director
director and
and
administrative
administrative
assistant is the title, it's
that's
just
why.
too big,
Yeah.
it wraps on,
Uh,
it wraps,
There's an full-time administrative assistant to the athletic director.
part-time.
Well, it's 0.93.
Part-time.
Oh,
Right.
0.9 full-time for the time of the
Yes.
year that
Yeah.
we're in,
Right,
the 11-month position, yes. So it's not a full FTE
Are there,
based on our system.
I'm racking my brain back to when we were adjusting the FTE count for the administrative assistant. We expanded it to account for facility rental work at some point.
Yes, so
Are
that's
we-
changed it quite a bit. but
Yes, so if that has changed, is the 0.93, which is what, an 11-month position?
Correct.
Just asking, like, truly administrative assistant work for the athletic department, are we an 11-month position or a 10-month position?
Well, first of all, she still does most of all the athletic facility rentals, correct? So why don't you explain?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to track the flow of the changes in that job.
Yeah, it's, well, what changed we went from, and I don't remember if it was 10 months or 11
It was 10, but it was really 11. So we
Right.
didn't like the way it was set up, so we made it a 10. There were a lot of complicated reasons for that, but it was effectively a 10-month position, but there was a person, we called it an 11-month position, we had to fix that, it became a 10-month, we then changed it to a 12-month,
Right, that's
and
right.
then, when the individual switched, when we got Dawn in there, we reduced it back to an 11-month, with her full, support for that.
But we're at the
Yeah.
right level as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. She's there, and I could be off a little bit on my days, but I believe it's 10 days after school ends, and then comes back 15 days or 12 days before school starts.
Yes, total of 30,
And,
yeah,
and
and before 10.
it's needed, it's definitely
Yeah,
needed
no,
for when
trust me,
she's
I'm
there.
It's a total of 20
Well aware of the
days.
logistics of the challenges of high school athletes.
Yeah.
No, that position.
Because our sports, our athletic season starts usually well before school starts, although, and with the new state regulations for football's actually gonna start even earlier next year. Not this fall, but the fall after. And then when Thanksgiving goes back to its regular spot in the calendar and backs up a week, then all the other sports will again start before school starts, which won't happen this fall.
So with the support of certain organizations in town and with your management, you've kept costs down. Are our coaching salaries in line with what's necessary to properly staff our teams from an athletic point of view and also from just safety and taking care of our athletes? Are you able to get the people you need at these prices?
The coaching salaries, and we haven't done a comparison with other schools in a few years. Our coaching salaries are probably on the low side of comparable, and that's estimating based on where they were. So they're not outrageously low, but they're on the low side of comparable is a fair way to put that. We have over the last 10-ish years worked in some assistant varsity coaches. We're still very short in certain sports, but we at least have now put ourselves in a position where all of our contact sports have assistant varsity coaches. I thought I would take a year off before I went back and started working on what we call the tier 2, which are the non-contact, like cross country. We have between 40 and 50 runners in our boys cross country program with one coach, which is tough for him to manage, and we've actually talked about having to make cuts in cross country, which we've never had to do before, but it kept growing and keeps growing, and we have a really qualified coach which helps that. But so those are the sports that we need to turn our sights to next. But again, given the current state of our budget, I think that this year especially was a great time to start asking for more coaches.
And I'd like to add to that, what Mark's talking about with this assistant, where we really get hurt is with the assistant coaches. So he's right in the sense that our comparisons with other districts for coaching compensation is low end of comparable. We haven't done a formal analysis, but that's our understanding. The problem that we have is we're not just competing with our districts, we're competing with private companies and youth sports. Youth sports pay more than we do. So a lot of the times a coach we might be interested in will end up going to a youth sports position because they're not bound. And the reason for that, you're not bound to the contract. Most of our coaches, I take that back. We always try to hire a teacher. So a person in the district who is interested in coaching. That isn't always the case. So what happens is the teacher contract controls the level of the stipend. We can't offer more to get someone, okay? So if the contract says you pay $4,000 a season, which is higher, but $4,000 a season, we can't say, you know what, you're really great. The only leverage, the only sort of leeway, thank you, we can use is there are steps. Is it 4 or 5?
Five.
5 steps, we are able to hire people at the top step, but again, this is not a lot of money. The other thing is those stipends only go up based on the negotiations with the teacher. So this year, the coming contract increases the stipends by 1%. That is not, and that's happened year after year. So what happens is the stipends are not keeping up with inflation. They're not keeping up with some of our competitors, especially youth sports that aren't bound by this. And it is a problem. And we've had a number of situations where we've had trouble finding, especially assistant coaches, which has led to other problems. So it is, to answer your question, my judgment, our assistant coaching levels are not compensating it, are providing sufficient compensation. But we can't change that in a budget. That's something that gets negotiated.
It's probably for
But you can
Bill, how do I, the certified stipends, non-certified stipends, the combination, when you go back to the detail, is there a way of working back from that?
Yeah, rounding up, or rolling that up.
Yeah, that's a roll up from something, I mean, and I'm sure it's some version of the
It's on
detail
the,
page.
on page 86, Mark, for the recap.
Yeah, well, everything's on there.
Everything's
Just a
on there,
matter of
yeah,
where
yeah.
you-
It's just,
I have
I don't
the
wanna-
How do you get to 403, for
I
example?
have the backup for every
yeah,
piece
yeah.
of
No,
information
not
on
that.
here, which I think I
Yeah.
sent
Yeah,
to Phil.
I'm
we'll
assuming
put
it's
something
some-
together.
I'm
and we'll
assuming
send
it's
it
some
out.
combination of the information on
It
the
is.
detail
Yeah.
We'll put
page.
something together and send it out.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because I
but-
was trying to make the math work to reach 403, and I couldn't figure out what rolled up.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll put something together, Mark. Send
It's
what
all
you
Sure,
have.
yeah, that's all the coaches and the athletic trainer and the support staff.
Yeah.
So I have spreadsheets that spell all those out
Yeah.
by sport.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we'll get something together.
that's a piece of
Yeah.
cake.
That's all.
And just, this is silly, but the miscellaneous column, if we've got supplies and purchase services and all of that, what generally
It's-
falls in there?
It's
Is
dues
it
and fees.
Dues and fees.
It's dues
Okay,
and,
okay,
yeah,
okay.
I don't
Yeah,
know
it's
why
on-
it still says.
Bottom of page 85.
Dues and fees.
Yeah.
That is the miscellaneous line.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And a question about, you guys do such an amazing job, and I think the rest of the whole school district could learn from boosters and, everything else, the way you raise some revenue for athletics. Gate receipts, obviously. What's your confidence level in your ability to raise that? And I'm seeing your numbers are pretty consistent across, and what is the plan if you don't raise it?
Well, our intention is to raise
Yeah.
it every year.
Yeah, so I was
So
just asking about
we
your
know-
confidence level.
Our confidence is high. We
Yeah.
know that we have to do that in order to continue to, put our athletes in the positions that they've been in the past. So, we feel pretty confident. I was able to raise our gate receipts a little bit. It's tough because that ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
As our teams do better, the gate receipts go up. If our teams don't do as well, we tend to have some fair weather fans,
Yeah.
especially our students themselves. So that can come and go depending upon how we're doing. And it really what drives that is the senior class. If our senior class goes out and supports their peers, the rest of the school follows, and school spirit goes up, and then we do even better at gate. I would love to have the opportunity to not charge our students to come watch their peers play sports. But that would be a big hit to our budget right now, and I don't think we'd be able to do that. And the other piece is we don't, well, that's it, it's not very expensive. They can do it very inexpensively if they're smart about it. And we don't do student IDs anymore, so it would just create a whole nother level of issues if we tried to do that. We don't charge for most of our sports anyway. It's really only the big spectator sports that we're charging for right now. Because we used to charge for a lot more and found that we were losing money by doing that.
Yeah, you wanna
So-
encourage people to come
So
to
we
those
stopped and
The distance and- And where does the boosters revenue fall in here? Is it on here?
No.
And what does that look like?
it can look like anything from probably 40,000 to 70,000 in a given school year, depending upon how many championships we have, because they do buy championship jackets for every athlete who's involved in a championship. What the needs are, what the requests are from the teams. So the average is right around 50,000, so that's what I put in I think that's what I put in the introduction, and use as a number. But it can vary from year to year, depending upon their fundraising ability and what they're able to do.
You also have the Gridiron Club, the Diamond Club.
Right, and those are the only other two. So Boosters really oversees everyone, which is not every school does that. Some school districts have a different booster club for every sport, which creates there's pros and cons to everything.
And what do you generally use all those funds for?
Boosters?
Yeah.
Those are the what might be considered extras, sweatsuits, team bags. It's still equipment that ends up belonging to the school. If Boosters purchase it, then it belongs to the school, and we keep it from year to year. So it's not like they buy backpacks for a team and then everyone walks off with those backpacks and they have to buy them again next year. They belong to the school. Training guides, like for basketball, they just bought some silhouettes so that they can use them to shoot over, use them to set screens around, things like that. Batting cages, nets. So it's the extras that we can't fit into our budget. They assisted with the purchase of football helmets with the Gridiron Club and the Booster Club and the athletic department. So we work together to try and figure out how we can best fit in whatever the needs are.
I mean, I guess an example, Gridiron bought the new football helmets.
Well, Boosters was involved with that, and athletics was involved with that. So we
that's-
all chipped, everyone chipped, and youth football even chipped in a little bit for that as well. So we, when there's a big need, we try to figure out the best way to do it without killing the athletic budget, so that we couldn't do anything else for any other program. And Boosters, we couldn't do what we do without the support of Boosters and Gridiron and Diamond Clubs. And we certainly appreciate all that they do.
The parents of other teams that don't have formal support networks will sometimes do fundraisers for equipment. Track did a fundraiser last season to buy, I forget what it was.
Yeah, it was a couple seasons ago, so we could get the high jump and the pole vault pads,
So it's,
because
the
again, it's a
parents
huge
are
expense.
the parents of the athletes are very supportive above what you see.
Thank you.
Mark, congratulations on a great year thus far. There's so much, you can even feel it in the community, like there's just so much enthusiasm around what's going on.
Thank you, yeah, it's, the best part of this job is the look on the kids' faces after they accomplish something that they themselves weren't even sure they were gonna be able to accomplish. And obviously football drives a lot of towns, and it was a real fun trip with our football team, but it isn't just football. I mean, it's everything. Our swimmers and our soccer teams had great years. It's just so much fun to be a part of that environment and watch them succeed and learn new things, and even when they don't succeed. And that's some of the best conversations, is when they don't succeed and you get to console them and talk to them, and it breaks your heart, but you know that they're going to be stronger for it. So it's all good, win or lose.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Thank you, that was great. Let's move to sped. Yes?
Can Mark be
Yes.
excused? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Can we be excused? Dr. President, can we be excused? Thank you.
Thank you.
Farewell, friend.
I wanted to go ahead.
Okay, so in special education, just a brief highlight that our goals continue to be increasing the effectiveness of our internal systems, developing the capacity of our building-based teams, which we've done consistently through professional development, and then continuing to develop parent partnerships with transparency and information about the special education process. So I won't go into details on those, but we continue to do those significantly and consistently throughout the year. So I'll just go through the accounts specifically and talk a little bit about each one. In the 1000s, which is the salary, there's an addition of a .4 special education teacher for the middle school and a .4 speech and language pathologist for grades 6 through 12. Those positions are to help us effectively meet the needs of individual students based on forecasting, not only looking at current needs and then forecasting those needs forward as best as possible. As Louis mentioned earlier, and I think is essentially understood, it is very difficult to make those projections. And I think that these projections will enable us to meet the needs of students. They are essentially, in some cases, both with our speech pathology and our special education teachers this year, we are pushing the limits of contract, and in some cases have exceeded that and needed to provide some additional compensation for people to make additional sections, additional classes, so that they could effectively meet the students' individualized education plans. Just a word within the salaries. I know we've talked quite a bit about paraprofessionals through this process. There is no change to the paraprofessionals going into next year. That is because, again, we've looked at the needs, we've looked at what we're projecting. I want to be careful about confidentiality here because this is such a small district. But just we understand and we know that when students move into district, we need to be able to plan for them and meet those needs. In many cases, in some cases, I should say, students do come in and they have paraprofessionals and certain other supports already identified on their IEPs. And when that happens, we need to be prepared to do that. That is not that is an occurrence that happens here in Weston. So we need to make sure that we have those resources available. We do continue to look at our paraprofessionals. I just recently collected all of their schedules along with the help of the assistant principals who monitor them very closely. And we look for every opportunity to create efficiency, to share across buildings, and all of that. So it is a need, it is there, we monitor it, and I think it's an appropriate forecast going into the following year. In the 3000s, I want to be, we are making a estimate here of cost for FY21 based on past trends and current programming. So looking at the contracted education services, 3210, 3220, 21, 25, what we've done essentially is look at past spending, reviewed current programs, and tried to come up with a number that we believe will meet the needs of those categories for our students and our staff. I think this is a very reasonable projection. You'll notice that it is a slight decrease overall, but it is, again, based on past analysis. Phil and I looked at this very closely, going back actually to individual vendors over the past 3 or 4 years to look at where are we spending this money on individual students, on particular cases, for example, and trying to forecast that based on our current experience. In the 4000s, there is looks like a large change, but it's actually not really significant. And then in the 5000s, just around the tuition and the ESS, I'll just talk briefly about those. Phil and I analyzed the tuition expenses, which includes in this line 5600 both the students receiving services out of district per their IEP, as well as settlement costs related to special education litigation. We reduced the sum of set aside essentially that 380,000 to 300,000. We realized that was a conversation that the board had last year. I am cautiously optimistic that that will be sufficient, and I think it's an appropriate move to make given the the current budget that we're discussing. Within that, we've also gone essentially student by student, looking at possible placement needs, projecting that, and as best as possible, really just look and see what do we expect, where do we expect these students to be needing approximately 10 months from now. So that's how that number came to be. I will tell you that it has changed. This situation has changed since this budget book was printed, right? And that is the frequency and the pace at which these decisions do change. So I still think we're in a very good position, but it changes very quickly. So that's just important to note. Looking at no significant changes here to materials. or equipment. And then, that really is it in terms of what I wanted to highlight. If I could just also say briefly that, some of the investments that we have made in the past, regarding, the supervision, the clinical supervision, for our BCBAs has been, helpful, in terms of developing consistency of our programs. And I continue to support we continue at this time to support the ESS program. I just want to talk, and Lisa stepped out, that was a discussion that we had this year.
Which, sorry?
The ESS program. So ESS is essentially it's a therapeutic program run within our high school. It's a contracted service. It is done very well by our students in many cases, and there needs and there's continued room for growth, not only with the program but how we use it. So we continue to believe it's effective, and we are including it. But we did look at it to see if it continued to be worthwhile, and we've had conversations with that staff regarding some of the needs that we have moving forward. Unfortunately, one of the Lisa was here; she could talk about it. One of the reasons why we called that to question was some of the staffing. There's been some turnover in the ESS staffing. The therapists that they provided have gone on to pursue other options in their own careers and personal lives. And while that's understandable, and we get it, at the same time, that is part of what's really important about the program is having consistency in the lives of our students. These are essentially the students who have probably the most difficulty or need in terms of developing relationships and those social skills. So that it's nothing that anyone did, but it is a reality that some of these people have moved on. So.
A question about that. The presentation on ESS is quite impressive in terms of it just what they offer. I always question the long-term viability of that business model for them. Because while it is impressive, and I think I think it's innovative, unique, and makes a lot of sense. It wasn't clear to me how they were going to survive over time and grow. And are you seeing cracks in that model in terms of the support they provide?
I don't have a basis to analyze the business model. I just don't know enough about that. Some of the turnover that we're aware of and that we're knowledgeable of is really related to people pursuing their own careers, their own practice, private practice, or having children and starting a family.
Right.
So I don't know that it's related to the business model per se, but nevertheless it does impact us, and that's why we had that conversation. I'll tell you just in terms of the presentation, what Lisa and her team have done is actually they've gone deeper into the statistics and into the analysis of the effects of ESS on our students and working with our students. So Lisa did a great job. She took what ESS had prepared and actually said, well, I don't understand this number and I want you to look at it this way. And they've been working with us to give us better metrics to the measurement. And ultimately to enhance their effectiveness with us. I mean, that's the goal. So I think it's been a good collaboration so far, and it is included in this budget. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Do we know where we stand as far as excess cost reimbursement, as far as Hartford doing their magic where they changed formulas on us at the last minute, as far as for this year and the impacts that may have for the budget for next year?
In terms of for this year, in terms of what that percentage is, we do not have an indication that there will be any adjustment. All of our estimates is based on a 70% reimbursement above the 4.5% per pupil. So right now everything is based on that 70% reimbursement.
And we haven't heard any rumblings of changes coming out of our
I was in a meeting recently with I serve on the Fairfield County. I'm the co-president of the Special Education Administrators for Fairfield County, and there's about 12 of us across the state. We meet with the state Bureau Special Ed Director once a month approximately. There is some discussion at the state level about adjusting excess costs. I don't know enough specifics to give you details at this point, but I know it has to do with lowering increasing the percentage of reimbursement, but with that, you can also adjust the threshold. So if you play with the percentage and you play with the threshold, you may end up with essentially the same amount of money. So I'm not optimistic that it's going to get any better. Hopefully, it will maintain. There are, it is an issue across the state that everyone is grappling with in terms of, the support for funding that excess cost.
And then with the Medicaid revenue, now that we've transitioned and we have everything in place to capture that reporting, are we truly comfortable with this revenue projection? And then what the converse to that question is, are we staffed appropriately now that we have that system in place? Are we staffed appropriately for the administration of that within the district?
We are staffed appropriately. I mean, I think the person we have doing the role has really taken it on very well. She works closely with me, and we do it. In terms of the projection, I think we're comfortable with it. I mean, this essentially is a unfunded mandate, and no one's going to make any money off this, and we have to do it. So
Correct.
No, understood, but just making sure that
Yeah.
we have to do it.
Yeah.
We have the costs in line with what we expect. And
Correct.
while it's not gonna make us money, are we being realistic with what our revenue projections?
In terms of the revenue amount, this is our first year where we're fully on board. I mean, it's still, I'm not 100% certain that we will hit this target. I just need a few more months as we get additional revenues to see how the quarterly, how we're trending on a quarterly basis, and also year over year as well, to formulate and get a better estimate as to where that number will be. So by the time we get to that final referendum in April, May, so we'll have a better sense as to how things are trending.
Okay. Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes.
I have two questions.
Sure.
Last year's budget, in terms of FTEs is 84, we're currently at 91. Obviously we had, unanticipated needs post the budget closing that resulted in the hiring of, what it looks like six paras. We were at 40, we budgeted 41, around 41, we're at 47 now. And so, that's an anticipated need that we needed to absorb this year. How do you, is that something, and obviously you can't predict. We can start the year and you can have, the need could arise again, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, that's absolutely true. You do the best you can. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. To the extent that it's possible to forecast, I speak regularly with area directors. I mean,
Right.
if someone has even an inkling that someone is moving to Weston, they give me a call.
Okay.
And they, it's not that we can necessarily do anything about it, but then I can get to Phil and say, look, this may be coming within the next 2 months. Let's just put it on our radar so we can try and plan for it accordingly and make sure that all the supports are in place. Even that is, from a budget perspective, a little bit too late. But it is the best. It's really the best that we can do, given what the law requires. I'll also tell you that just from a planning perspective, I mean, the building assistant principals and the principals, we monitor this very, very closely. If there's needs that are shifting, we'll move a para from one building to another. We've also invested, and I think this is important too, and it's not directly related to your question, but I want to just get it out there. We've invested quite a bit in training for our paraprofessionals. I mean, typically speaking, this can be a transient population within a workforce because the salary is not great. I mean, it's good, but it's not great. They do get benefits, and it's really hard work that they do. By investing in them in their professional development, we're hoping that we can maintain them and continue to keep good people in these positions and on the job working with our students. And we've done that through offering them professional development. We've taken advantage of all the elementary conference days, for example, where they're contractually here and their students are not. So we're providing them workshops on behavior management strategies, social emotional strategies.
Is that paying off? Are you seeing a retention or a greater level of interest?
I haven't analyzed the retention facts, but anecdotally, people have written me or said to me, so thank you, that was really helpful. This, we're using this, it's good information. We've also invested last year, we trained 2 of our staff members in physical management training, which is really required by the state. We now have people in district to do that, so we're offering that training to, people in our buildings, particular paraprofessionals. It's all about de-escalation and working with students in heightened situations. So, I think by investing in them and training them, hopefully we can maintain them, and then ultimately, that is the most efficient workforce. The well-trained, knowledgeable, student-centered people.
I have only one other question, and that is, how do other districts deal with the lack of predictability issue? So in any given year, you can have this pop in need for resources to cover these. How do they deal with that? I mean, they pad the budget each year, or do they?
Well, I wouldn't say anybody pads the budget. I think you have to. I'm not going to put that out there. I think you need to. I think you need to plan. Given it's a sort of a given uncertainty, right? And it's going to happen. You just don't know how much. This goes back to the question Gina and asked earlier about the size of the district that we were discussing. In a larger district, 2 or 3 students move in, 2 or 3 students move out. It sort of washes out. You don't see that necessarily here. The impact of any individual situation, has a larger sort of ripple effect in the pond. So I think that is I hadn't thought about it until you just said it, but I think that is an effect of being in a smaller district. You just feel it more.
Yeah.
I know the number of students and their names that moved in that we didn't expect. And we're monitoring those. We're trying to make sure they have the best programs in place. So I didn't necessarily have that same level of understanding in a larger district.
I think to some degree, this is a communications issue, a public communications issue, where the district, we, the public, need to know that this is a variable that one cannot predict and will impact the budget one way or another, right? And I think it's a really important thing for folks to know that the sped budget going up by $500,000 is not by choice and strategy. It's in direct response to need, period. In terms of those students that came in that needed special services, and that's a communications issue.
Yeah, I think it's a communication/education issue. Our job is to meet the needs of all the students here, and that's special education students, it's regular education students. People have different needs. We need to meet those needs.
By law.
Yeah, well, the special ed piece is, it's very
right.
clear. It's frankly not something that is debatable.
Right.
So, I think doing that, I've done some workshops. I actually have one upcoming where I've reached out to some members of the Board of Finance to help them understand, the sort of structure that's in place in which we operate to meet these needs.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Legal fees, I know we're trending this year pretty much on budget at 150, right? And right now we are. Is that, do we anticipate, are there things coming up where we anticipate that number to be higher than 150? And how does that relate to then how you plan next year?
So not directly included in the special ed budget, but more so included in the district-wide budget.
Right.
That anticipated need that we could have, which is the additional 50,000 that we've spoken about.
Right, okay.
So it's not built directly to special.
It's not really just.
Correct, it's more of a district-wide, and then if as needed, we will do transfers.
Phil and Mike, I'm not sure who's the best one to answer this. In the past, we have included this unanticipated special ed component in our budget. For this year's budget, it was $380,000. What's the amount included?
300.
300.
Right. So we did. Again, Phil and I looked at that, and I think that's a reasonable placeholder, given what we know and the budget discussions that we're having.
Sorry. Your salary is fully under sped, but you also manage PPS. Is that correct?
Yes, your salary is included in 100% spec.
Why is it 100% sped if he also does PPS?
No particular
Yeah.
reason as to
I-
why it's
I-
all in one place.
I think historically that was just the
Yeah.
case. I know what you're getting at. I think the simplicity of it and not looking like we have different salaries, but I don't recall ever discussing whether it should be there or not, so that's just,
I mean, we've broken out PPS so you can see that separate from SPED, but I mean,
It
they
doesn't
really
include
could,
it.
they really could be together, SPED and PPS, but
They
you
could,
get a
and-
better look this way, which
It's
is
just-
knowing
it's a
that Mike's
salary.
salary is, you know, it's in one cost
I
center.
mean, Mike, is it fair to say that the majority of your time is spent on SPED or not?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I think it's a good question, Hillary.
Yeah.
I would, if we were to carry that logic forward and within a budget book, I think we might run into a lot of complicated things, because, for example, all of our principals have their foot in a special ed world at one point or another during their day too. So
That's true.
I'd have a hard time, parsing out how much time is what. My job, mostly is special education, PPS, but I think,
Just
I
a
think your
minor,
point is understood.
a minor nitpick on
Yeah.
page 33, when it has the administration titles, it just has assistant superintendent of PPS under your title. Might want to put SPED in.
I think it's there, it's probably just a matter of.
That's actually its title.
What is its
It's its actual title, because SPED is included within PPS. So,
But broken out in the, but,
yeah, but the title itself is that, Assistant Superintendent of Pupil Personal Services.
okay,
But you're correct, and you could make the title longer.
all right, fine.
Yeah,
Well, that's what confused, I
Won't
honestly.
fit on your business cards.
and that's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
problem.
yeah. But, I guess that was the reason maybe for some of our questions about where the salary is, because
Yeah.
people are looking in PPS then.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all.
Yeah, that's
Right.
unfortunate.
Yeah,
nature
just
of
a
the
little,
job, but-
yeah.
My quick question.
Sure.
When you're, looking at the total piece of the pie of SPED.
Yep.
Would it be fair to lump SPED transportation into this number as well? Because I'm trying to understand the completeness of this world and,
Yep.
and a kind of a percentage to the total, right?
Yep.
And so I know that there are a couple things in maybe the PPS world that would be applicable here, but
Yep.
kind of as
Yep.
apples to apples as we can get,
Mhm.
lumping in SPED transportation in here.
Yeah, it's fair. Special, transportation under special education is actually considered a related service, just like speech and language pathology, just like occupational therapy, counseling, all those things. So, by law, we are required to provide transportation for students receiving special education services if they require different transportation than what is, provided for regular education students.
Right. Okay, and so then, if you actually were to lump SPED transportation
Yeah.
into this number, then you're kind of looking at a piece of the pie that's actually increasing by 2.5%, right, year over year. That's
Okay.
only when I just add in SPED transportation. So my
Right.
question is,
Yeah.
we have added a lot of support into this area. And so when you're adding a lot of support, I guess my question is, are we seeing the return, knowing that it's gonna vary student by student in terms of the cost, are we seeing a return for all of the support that we're adding in this area?
I believe so. I mean, I can tell you specifically about the transportation, but then more broadly, with the transportation, there is obviously an increased cost this year that we've discussed. The level of service, is improved, as a result of that, and I may have mentioned this already. In the past, we had, when we had our own drivers and we didn't have people to make those runs, we would, be unable to bring those students to their programs. And we'd have to rely on either parents or, maybe students not attending that day, which obviously is not good. Given, the services we have this year, we are, if there's a driver that's out, it's not our responsibility, it's the companies, and they find the replacement and they bring the student. So, that is a higher level of service within the transportation that I'm, really pleased with. In general, the investments that we've made in the special education, services that we've provided across the district, I think are improved. I can give you just a couple statistics. With the addition of the assistant director positions a couple of years ago, we've actually, last year we did about 75 more PPT meetings within the district. To me, what that means is attentiveness and coming back to the table to address questions before they get to a point where there's some kind of disagreement. So that being able to bring those people together, have that meeting, make a plan, and move forward is really quality instruction, quality responsiveness. So I think there's evidence there. I'll also tell you that just procedurally, and I don't have data to show you this, but we've spent a good amount of time both with our teachers and with our leadership team really working on consistency in our procedures across the entire district. So looking at, if you have experience at a planning and placement team at Hurlbut, does that look and sound similar to what you would see at WIS at the middle school and at the high school? And are we implementing the law in a way that's consistent across our buildings? And we're making good progress towards that. We put some things in place that I think are really helpful. It takes time, and obviously there's a lot of other variables in it. But I think that the supports that we have are putting us in a position to do that more consistently. The final thing I would say is just talking about ESS, for example, talking about the programs we have, our learning lab classes, our community classes. These are our highly specialized programs within our buildings. The investments we've made in professional development for those teams has helped us. We've brought back 1 or 2 students from out-of-district placements, or from placements where they were made unilaterally by parents. We've been able to bring them back in, show them the sort of continuum that we have, so that we can and we can meet their needs in district. There's still a cost associated with that because that's staffing and that's hours and that's all of that. But in terms of an obligation, it's meeting those needs in the environment closest to their home school with typical peers. And there's a great benefit to that, not only sort of morally, but also legally. So those are the improvements that I see, and at the same time, those are areas where we can continue to improve.
And so with maintaining privacy, what kind of, because I think I sent the email in terms of enrollment.
Yeah.
Just understanding, because for the new board members,
Yeah.
and you'll learn this in the special education overview that Mike's going to give you,
Yeah.
but the student is with us until the age of 20, correct?
Some students can receive special education services through the year in which they turn 21.
In 21, okay.
Correct.
So just understanding, I know last year it was provided kind of by grade, how many students were enrolled
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this program. I don't know if we need to go into executive session for that or what, but what kind of clarity can you provide around that?
I saw your request. I'm actually working. There's a state issued report that I may be able to use that I think actually gives better information than that grid. That grid was very problematic to me. One, because it did identify sort of low numbers in grades, which I always get a little shaky on. And then secondly, it would just change so frequently that it's by the time you saw it, it was almost inaccurate.
Yeah.
I
Is
would
that a good guide though to understand?
Yeah. So I'll give you
Is it at the end or is it at the beginning that we're going to then carry through? Do you know what I mean? To understand that.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily use it that way because again, you can have a student that becomes eligible in 7th grade,
for sure.
And be exited in 4th grade.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, just let me step back a little bit and give you some information. So across the state of Connecticut, the eligibility rates for special education is at a 20-year high. All right, so the state of Connecticut now is almost at 15% as an identification rate. That rate has increased every year, I think, for the past 11, and then if you go back, it's a steady increase. Weston currently last year was at, I believe, 10.3% identification. That will go up this year, and I think appropriately so. I mean, one of the areas that I was sort of caught my attention coming in was we were a little bit lower than what you might expect to see in the DERG. In terms of identification rates. And what that means to me is we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of every kid, that we're identifying students when they do have those needs and planning appropriately. So I think what you'll see from Weston perspective in the 1920 school year is an identification rate probably around 11%, maybe high 10s, low 11s. So in that sort of area there, which I think again it's an increase in identification rate, appropriately so, I believe. That's also impacted by, if you have a slight decrease in enrollment and a larger, the increase is a little bigger.
Yeah.
And that actually is part of what the state discusses too, that overall, some of the state enrollment is dropping and yet special education continues to grow. So I think from a very high level perspective, you're gonna see a slightly increased rate of special ed identification within Weston.
Okay.
And that's consistent with, really all the colleagues that I speak with in the area, it's consistent with that, and certainly consistent, although thankfully not to the same extent, with what the state is experiencing.
And then I think another important thing is, well, I appreciate the fact that schedule is problematic.
Yeah.
I do think, looking at the total number or either K-5, 6, 12 numbers of students we have with 504 plans, because those students do still get PPT meetings, they still, extra, services in certain pockets, that I think that is a broader range of our population, and as far as, your assistant directors managing essentially a caseload of families, I think that that's important information in some capacity for people to have an education about.
Yeah, the 504s are primarily managed by the building administrators and the counselors. And yeah, we can get some information on some identification rates within 504 as well. Absolutely.
Any other?
I just had one. Mike, you alluded to the out-of-district tuition. I see that it's decreased.
Yeah.
So help me understand why the transportation is increasing if the out-of-district tuition is decreasing, or is the transportation only in district? We are transporting people out of district if the need is there.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why do you think there's a difference?
We didn't do when we went through the list of students that could possibly receive out-of-district tuition, we went student by student, looked at, what we could maybe expect for the following year. We did the same thing with transportation in terms of current rides, current costs. Rides vary. So for example, if we have a student going to a school in, northeastern Connecticut, that's far more expensive, for example, than going with us bringing 3 kids at the same time to cooperative educational services in Trumbull. So there's not an exact correlation there. So again, we just went.
Okay, so there's not a trend or anything because it seemed like the transportation increase was, kind of large.
Yeah, I think some of it was, and Phil, you can.
So it's a few pieces to that. So if you're looking on the budget increase year over year, you'll see that where we were, where we thought we would be for FY20 is significantly higher. And that's what's driving the majority of that increase. Because I think for FY10 we're about 270 more than where we were last year. Part of that has to do with ESY transportation. Second component that has to do with extended school year services that we have. In addition to that, we also have additional students who are transported that we are in general transporting for FY20, and that will continue into FY21 as well.
I think when we looked at it, we had about $175,000 of unanticipated transportation.
Yeah, I think there's unanticipated, but I also think that we probably miscalculated a bit on the cost of transportation in the last year's budget too.
That is also part of it.
Yes.
Any other questions?
So move to PPS.
I did review PPS last week, Tony, so I'm not sure if you want me to go through it again when we talked about.
Right.
Yeah, certainly, any questions?
No. Any additional questions
I
on
have
that?
one question. So, my question is, at Hurlbut, do you need 2 psychologists? Can one be a social worker?
That was, do you want me to address that? Do you want to?
Go ahead.
Our model, in the past has been 1 counselor and 1 school psychologist, and we found over the past few years that there has been a dramatic increase in the need for testing at the building level, and a counselor cannot do that, nor can a social worker. A school psychologist is the only one who can do that level of testing. With the preschool, we have there's a significant number of students coming out of the birth to 3 program. When they turn 3, that becomes a school responsibility, which brings an increased testing load. So this is the first year we've had the school psychologist, and they're busy all day, every day.
And I think it's also pointed out, the compensation level's the same. They're both in the teacher union.
Right.
For a counselor and a
School psychologist.
school psychologist?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
I mean, sometimes one will have more graduate credit than the other, but it frequently is the same.
there's not a cost savings to.
Correct.
Mike, do you wanna add to the?
No, I just, when I look at building capacity across a district, and, you know, I have great appreciation for counselors, for social workers, and for school psychologists. Psychologists do have the added, ability to conduct testing as well as provide the counseling services that, you know, a counselor or social worker could do. So while the, you know, the training is slightly nuanced, largely, when you're adding a psychologist, you get that ability to evaluate, which is, significant.
With, our ELL program, how are we, this is the first year we went to the .4 FTE versus the individualized approach that we've used in the past. Capacity, are we seeing more English language second kids coming in, or are diversities changing? What
Yeah,
are we
you wanna speak to that, or?
Yeah, we're currently servicing approximately 20 students, which is, you know, around what we had projected. So, we have seen, an increase over time to the point where we are now. I mean, that number prompted the need for the additional .4. We do have a staff member who, you know, uses that time and is, you know, really, you know, on roller skates going from building to building. But we would not increase that at this point. We think we're appropriately staffed.
So right now, the individual doing this goes to the, whichever buildings the students are in and does pull-out sessions with those students to work with them, is that the?
We have a schedule for each of the schools and, highly coordinated, but what we try to do is, you know, find the points in their schedules that have the least impact on other, aspects of their program.
Can I add to that? So in addition to the services, there's also a testing component. We have to identify whether students need those services, based on a home language survey. So while we only service maybe 20 across the district, there are more students that, come through the program in terms of testing to see if they qualify for services.
Okay, thank you.
Who would oversee an ELL teacher? If you have a teacher going from building to building to building, who manages the teacher to understand if that person is using their time in the most efficient manner?
So, couple things. One, just to get up and running with this program and teacher, the coaching piece was big. So under the World Language Curriculum Instructional Leader, we provide the coaching, because she also has the certification, so she has been living in that world as well. So Mercedes is a really good resource and has been there for the training. As a group, what we do is, you know, whoever has the lion's share of the time tends to be the administrator who evaluates a part-time person in their building. So then, you know, we have, you know, a principal who evaluates. It also comes under Mike and me. This poor person has, you know, 6 people who are working closely with them, but one person who does the evaluation. I don't know who it is off the top of my head, but the person also teaches Spanish, and I believe Patty, you're her evaluator, correct? So Patty's the overall evaluator.
I would say that, you know, when she comes to each of our buildings, we work closely with her. Like, for example, she comes to me on Monday, and she's there Monday morning. So I always swing in, and the 2 kids that she works with, I check on, see what's going on with these kids. So it's that kind of thing. And I feel comfortable doing it just because of my background, because I can also teach ELL. So, and she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's great.
All right, so moving on to curriculum, I'm just being conscious of time here, we've got an hour and 10 minutes, so I'm not going to do much of a preface. I can start by answering one of the questions that you had posed previously regarding conference and travel. Conference and travel, there was a question about the dollar amount we have budgeted over time, and what we currently budget is at an area that could be reduced. And one of the things you see, and I don't know if you have this table in front of you, but it was handed out at the last session, it's the conference and travel budget for, this was how we use the funding in FY19. Well, at any rate, we had budgeted this was last year, FY19, $41,000, and the actual, that we used of that was 27,000, but we also, we have in the past couple years become aware of the Miriam Clark Trust Fund, which is held at the town level, that allows us only to use those funds for professional development services. What we have done in the past couple of years is use that fund, tapped into it. In fact, we've used all of that fund. And what that has allowed us to do is when Rich was here and we had some pressures in the budget, sped and other things, to reallocate some of that conference and travel monies. So what I've done, though, is trued up for this year. Now, we don't have the ability to tap into that grant money in the current budget. So $34,000 is the request, which is in line. If you look at FY19, it's how we came up with that figure of 34, 27,000 plus the 5 and change, which is sort of consistent with our actuals.
I see. It looked from the accounting that you were off, or that you really underutilized more than you had. You just sourced from a different place.
We did, because the other needs and pressures that, we were basically in deficit the past couple of years.
Fine.
We did that.
Yep.
But overall, the C&I budget, this is our research and development budget. It's also our coaching budget, professional development, curriculum development, and the resources for learning that we may need in terms of textbooks, testing, and evaluation. Much of it is in salaries of curriculum instructional leaders, the assistant superintendent, the assistant to the assistant superintendent. I think that's of the 1.3 million, that's over 900,000 of that budget. So some of the deltas within the budget, in terms of materials, remember we have finished the implementation of the new science program. So you see materials has gone down. You see in certified staffing, you see an increase there that's due to contractual increases, but also in this cost center, we did restructure the math CIL position to include targeted support at Hurlbut and targeted support at WIS. There is an offset for that, is not shown in this budget, but in the SPED budget, we reduced math enrichment in order to fund this investment. So sometimes things go across cost centers, but you see that really accounts for the increase of 3% within the C&I budget.
I have just a question on that, which is, we have the academic support headcount, let's say, for example, in the middle school, right? The addition of the academic support headcount in the middle school. How, just in terms of accountability, how does that work? I mean, it's within the middle school headcount. I'm assuming, is the accountability ultimately to the principal, to you? When we talk about specifically the increase in academic support, we know why, right? How does that work?
So it's within a matrix. So the interventionists at the building level report to the building principals. Okay, and then in terms of my involvement, I am working systemically with those reading consultants and the math interventionists to help address the goals we have as a district, and working with the principals with them. SILs report to me, but again, within a matrix, the building principals meet with them regularly and work with them closely.
I would just add that, like Dr. Cross said, I mean, the interventionists, people that work with us, they have to have a quantitative student learning objective.
Sure.
And when they work on it, it's part of the evaluation process. So if that's their role, they better be able to identify a goal of what they're doing in that role, and then we meet periodically with them, like we all have to meet with them in January.
Sure.
And they better bring data to explain what they're doing.
Right.
I have a quick question. Phil, when I know last week you said that we would get the key budget drivers this week, so that's all of the details around these increases. Can we still expect that this week?
Later this week, yes, I kind of
Okay.
just took a pause just to work it, kind of focus on some other stuff.
Okay, only because you're right, it is, the total salary and wages in CNL is 82% of the entire budget, and there's a 7% increase in that, so I just wanna see the details around that. My next question is around the consulting services. So with adding additional support in the math and the reading, there's also increase in consulting for those two areas. Well, for emotional intelligence and literacy. So what there's additional support and consulting that goes with that?
So our consulting services, overall $50,000 is the request this year. That is, we've been able to keep that number fairly low because our curriculum instructional leader model, they provide most of the professional development, and the principals, also pitch in as well. And we have tapped into our own staff to provide professional development. But there are times where we do need this additional outside expertise. Where you see a slight increase here, the literacy training. We had budgeted last year for K-5 work with the Teachers College consultants. We need some additional support in grade 6 in particular, but I would say middle school, but it's grade 6 in particular to address some areas that we want to improve there in that transition from 5th to 6th. So the K-8 reading strategies that we've been implementing, that really accounts for that change this year. But you see continuation of services, continuing to support the NGSS science, emotional intelligence.
I guess my question is more around just the overall budget, because the overall budget of 51,000 is up 30% from last year. And I just wanna be careful that we're not, I don't wanna use the word padding, we're looking for another word, but I don't wanna build in knowing that we've always got backup if we need outside services to help with teachers or to, you know what I mean?
This is built, you can see, it's built from the ground up. This budget's gone anywhere from, $40,000 to $100,000 depending on the initiative. But overall, the Curriculum and Instruction Cost Center generally has been, just about 2% of the overall budget of the district. And so you don't see great fluctuations overall here, but that's driven by needs. We can, we can look at that certainly, and see if we can, find some other funding streams. And we have, for DBT, we've gone to outside support from WEF and the PTO with the startup of Love.
Okay. What's the book budget? Why is there such a jump there if we finished implementing the math and science?
Yeah, a good question. It's all driven by electronic subscriptions that have come due.
So under books, it's actually electronic subscriptions?
Well, we generally are able to obtain both, sometimes hard copy as well as the electronic together, or just the electronic. So math in particular, we had grade 5, 6, and 8 come due, and those.
The electronic dues.
Yep, and those are for electronic subscriptions. That's with the math and focus, as well as some algebra. There's a subscription for Chinese there. And again, I think you'll see years when it's on the lower side, and you'll see years where, because of the need, it's hard to space these out perfectly so that that line doesn't fluctuate a little bit. But overall,
well, we're just seeing from 2017-18 to now, a $33,000 increase, and you would think that the more digital we go, the less we spend on books.
Actually,
Which it's gone up.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what
No,
I'm
I mean,
saying.
the publishers are actually, they've realized that's
Yeah.
where they can make their money, and they're raising the prices.
So is this gonna be a steady increase, or is this gonna flatten out at some point?
I think it's not gonna be, you know, let's say $50,000 year over year. What I will say is, you know, on average, it's about $50,000 year over year. This year is a little.
It's a lot higher. So, and there's nowhere to go with that, because those programs came due, like Math and Focus, you're not gonna not obviously resubscribe, that's not debatable, but is there any other wiggle room in there, Ken?
You know, there's flexibility at the end of this year, as we're projecting out that we could pre-buy with some of these, if there's any resources that we can, like, yeah, I mean, I doubt it, but there's always that possibility where if we can, you know, we can project out in the next month or so, we try to reduce that.
Okay, thank you.
But I would just say, just to try to account for that, we've really looked at other areas within this budget closely to see, you know, where we can save.
Yeah.
Hillary's trying to get a question out.
So I feel very strongly that you keep math enrichment. I don't see how getting rid of it and adding support are not independent of each other. So I guess what I'm looking for is, what's the strategy to get rid of it, Wes?
Sure. I would say they're connected, but they are independent. If you were not to move forward with the investment, if we decide that that's, you know, we can't move forward with the math investment, we would still recommend to eliminate the math enrichment. The enrichment that's given, we believe our teachers in the classroom can provide through differentiation, rather than having this additional FTE. You know, because when you look at it from a student standpoint, it's the teacher coming in once every 2 weeks to do a special lesson on enrichment. We feel that that's a luxury as opposed to a need. And so we do see a need for that additional coaching support, but we obviously know the pressures of the budget. So even if we weren't to go with that investment, we've got to speak to that too, with that.
It's a luxury, I mean, it's great, it's wonderful to have. Having extra coaching will provide that differentiation in the classroom.
Thanks, you guys. I'm worried, you know, when you have a Western perspective that comes into this town and wants to know about all of the enrichment opportunities as a differentiator from other districts, what are we saying to this prospect?
Well, it's not typical to provide enrichment during the school day for intermediate level students. And even, you know, at the middle school level, they might have a club session that meets during the day, they have an X period. But if you look at our middle school, we have a full list of stipends and co-curricular activities that do meet. You know, at the elementary level, you tend not to find that across the DER to have much of that. Those kinds of more of those paid-for programs.
Wasn't there, correct me if I'm wrong, when we're looking at the math test scores, I feel like there was, the grade 6, the transition from the 5th to 6th was a problem.
Sixth grade.
Not
score,
as,
yes.
as
Sixth grade
robust
score.
as we would have
Yeah.
hoped. So I do see Hillary's point when you're talking about investing in the middle school to try and, you know, correct for that. Why you would look to cut back in the intermediate school where, you know, those kids would be feeding in at that crucial year where we did see a drop in the scores. I don't know.
It's a
Maybe
sixth
see it
grade
as
issue,
different.
it's not, that sixth grade score is a sixth grade issue related to rigor and expectations, and we're working on that. The issues at WIS are different. I mean, our 5th grade had tremendous scores in math based on some of the moves that we made. But we do see the level of, you know, intervention support that's needed at the middle school
So you see
has
it's more than
has increased. Yes. At Hurlbut, we see catching the kids, you know, earlier and helping the teachers with the differentiation as the need that'll help us moving into the WIS. You know, as an aside, we're saying that enrichment piece is not an essential service at this point, given you know, all the other needs that we have. And in the past, you should know historically, the enrichment at the middle and The intermediate school, connected to the Project Challenge teacher, kept those teachers whole and based in those schools. And so my predecessor had created the mock trial in order to do that, had created the math, writing enrichment at WIS. We don't have the level of Project Challenge need for 2.0 teachers. I think that's what we're, and we can talk more in curriculum
Yeah.
too, and I get in more detail.
I'd like to see DIRG data on gifted and talented and enrichment, and what age and what grade they're starting that, and what that looks like, what the options are, because I think it's a big advantage that we have it. I think it's a track that we should keep, and I'd like to, and again, this is a curriculum discussion, but, you know, add a level of rigor at the middle school that then continues. I think you have a population that, that would benefit from that. So I feel strongly that I still, after discussing it with you, still, you know, would like to see data before I would say that I think that, you know, that's something that
we can provide you our data with the number of students that we have in Project Challenge. Remember, the Project Challenge program is separate from this enrichment was with all students. It wasn't just targeted for Project Challenge. And for, you know, I can share with you, I mean, there are a few districts that have Project Challenge programs, and I think that is one of the, you know, I think services we provide and personalize our education for students that have those needs. Westport, Darien, and New Canaan have those as well. Wilton and BR9 do not. In terms of the number of students, you know, they service, or how, that would take some time to pull that together, but I can get, you know, I can try to get on that and see if we can get for curriculum committee, which is on Wednesday.
Okay.
Which I have this, you know, enrichment, Project Challenge, all these, any of the investments as well are on that agenda for Wednesday, to give us the room to have further conversation.
There's nothing else. Mike is here, so maybe we'll skip to facilities and then we'll go back to technology.
Okay.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
So, Bill, Mike, what was yours?
So as we develop the facilities budget, a lot of the costs that we have and the increase that we have, if any, is really based on a historical trend and how we've seen things, and just to ensure that we have enough money allocated to cover any unforeseen or unexpected events like what just happened today at the middle school, where we had a nice flood that we had to address. So
Not as bad as last winter.
No, nothing like that.
Thank you.
So as we develop the budget, we definitely try to ensure that we have enough money in all the relevant areas. I just want to highlight a few things in terms of just on the utility side. So we, as you guys know, we are on that virtual net metering, where we do purchase, where we do get, like I say, energy from the sun through partnership that we have, I think, with three vendors. We, based on the projections that we have received from these vendors, there is a projected reduction in the credit that we expect to receive from Eversource. So it is factored in. So there will be a 20% reduction in that credit that we will receive from Eversource, which is factored in.
Do we know why?
No, that's how the program itself is structured.
How do I get that at my house? This is really what you're
They
asking.
don't-
No.
It's not available yet.
Yeah.
Not available
Right,
yet.
so I'm gonna get back to another item that we have is that we currently are in contract to purchase, where we, on our delivery side, on our supply side, where we have a very favorable rate on the supply side. That contract will expire next year. We are seeing about a 13% or so increase in based on market trend in that rate, which is also factored in. So those two items combined is why you're seeing that 60,000 or so increase in utilities. There's really no other significant increases that we have to talk about. There was a special project that we had for FY20, which we took out because we have not identified any special projects
Yeah.
going into FY '21. Sorry, my years getting a little bit mixed up. So that's pretty much facilities in a nutshell, unless we have specific questions.
Can you just do a quick review on the cleaning issue? I know, having not paid attention in my 11 years being in the district as to how the quality of cleaning has been in the district. But I do hear from the grapevine that it used to be awful and now it's much better.
Right.
And really I'm asking about the cost increase from, and I think we talked a little bit about this already, but we have a new contract.
Right, so just in terms of the cost increase, I think historically, the company that we were with, and I think Lewis had mentioned on this briefly, the company that we were with, correct, was a non-union company. And I think built into that contract was a favorable rate increase that we have, which is really insignificant.
Right.
For right now, I think beginning this fiscal year, FY '20, the company who we're with is a unionized outfit, which is part of the reason why our rates are a little bit higher than where it was historically.
Is there no possibility of finding a non-unionized cleaning outfit that is high quality? Like, is
Yeah,
that not?
so it's actually very.
And I'm asking naively, so.
It's a very complicated situation. So what happened, and I could talk about this for an hour and a half, and I'm not going to. But it's very complicated.
2 minutes or less.
So Phil is correct. When we brought on Shamrock, the former company, they were not a unionized company. They were paying minimum wage essentially to, and I don't know if it's exactly minimum wage, but close to minimum wage, to their staff. It was bid on that basis. Our contract that we entered into with Shamrock was a 5-year contract with a 1% escalation each year, very favorable to the district. In the middle of the contract, they were unionized. So what happened was I forget which local it was, but the union came in, organized the staff, and ultimately they did unionize. That's not our union, it's their union. We are not under the jurisdiction of the NLRB and National Labor Relations Board, so we had nothing to do with this. But they negotiated but never reached a settlement. So there was never a collective bargaining agreement, and our position was that even if they did settle for higher wages, we had a set contract with a 1% escalation. There was nothing in the contract that would require us to renegotiate if they unionized. So we had a good deal. We kept the deal. We knew that the increase was going to be substantial. Once, if we had to pay the higher wages, we held the line, we maintained it, it's what happened. When we bid it out, we did not bid it out requiring a union, we just bid it out.
Yeah.
However, financially, what came in and meeting our staffing needs happened to be a unionized group. We don't take the position either way, whether there should be a union or not be a union, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But based on the bids that came in, we had two different, there were groups that bid either way, but this was the optimal one for us.
In what year was that?
That was last year, was this year.
Okay,
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's a lot more to it, but I won't give it all to you. So what happened is the new company came in, and the big difference between this company, as I understand it, and how Shamrock operated, is these staff are mostly part-time employees. So they don't necessarily offer benefits. If they do, it's only to certain employees. This is as I understand it. I don't have the specific details in front of me, but needless to say, it's still more money because the wages are considerably higher. And in either case, now with a minimum wage law in Connecticut, we would reach these levels anyway. We costed out what it would be, for instance, to do it internally, and it's still way more money than we're paying for this contract. So we can't put out, from a public policy point of view, we cannot put out a bid request saying we will not accept union labor. That, for various legal reasons, that would not work out for us. However, we didn't say we needed it. So some districts will actually put 2 clauses in their bids. One would be, you must have unionized labor, okay, which we didn't do, and you must have what's, a living wage. We did not put that language in. and a living wage is sort of a, you know, not an exact term of art, but basically $11 an hour is not a living wage. We did not do either of those things. So we basically threw it out to the world and saw what we got, and this is what was chosen.
And this was significantly less than what we had anticipated originally.
Oh, yes, and the increase we thought we were gonna get was much higher than what we actually got.
I think is that we were expecting at least $200,000
At
or
least.
so more.
Yes, and
Than
we
we
got
our
lucky
current
with that.
levels.
And the increase between last year and this year?
This is the
Because
first
last
year of the new
this is the first
contract.
year of the new contract. So last
Last
year
year's
we
the
were paying
non-union
Shamrock,
contract.
and our little 1% increase, and the $11 or so an hour wage, which again, we don't pay directly, they pay, and we pay them. But when you have labor at $11 an hour, it's gonna be a lot cheaper than labor at a
Right.
negotiated wage.
What I think what Kathy's getting at is when you look back to 2017 to 2019, you're looking at $150,000 increase in 2 years, and then you're looking at another $50,000 increase on top of that,
Yeah.
which is the difference you're talking about. So
Oh,
when you look
absolutely.
collectively, I mean, this is a $250,000
But-
increase.
But we had anticipated $750 to $1 million.
That
What
was
is
the
the difference
anticipated
forward?
increase because of the wage differences. What we got lucky with here is and something that the board, when Shamrock renegotiated, 6 years ago, and not just renegotiated, there was a bid. The reason the board at that time chose Shamrock was because staff had been here for many years, they were reliable at the time, they were not part-time employees. Getting part-time employees and not having significant turnover is a very difficult thing to pull off in Weston. So needless to say, the people who are doing your cleaning are not from Weston, they're not even from adjoining communities, they're from pretty far away. Because people can't earn $11 or $14 or $15 an hour and be anywhere near here. So the board at the time made the decision that even though it was a little more, they got the 1% increase each year, which was a really low number, and they got what they deemed more reliable employees. That was before the unionization, that was before everything I described. The increase is lower because the staff that this company uses are not full-time. They're part-time labor, the benefit costs are much lower, but you're also going to have much more turnover, which is something that we've struggled with. And I would not agree necessarily with the analysis, and I'm not in charge of cleaning or the sort of facilities, but I've heard plenty of complaints about the effectiveness of the current company as well. Right, so we're actually struggling with that, and they may have underbid their staffing, and that's something we're working on.
Okay.
Now, is the $50,000 increase, something that's kind of baked, or?
That is baked into the current contract.
It's baked into the current
Yes.
contract. We are not considering, I mean, there are also discussions going on, that may lead to potentially, paying more in the existing contract, or have we completely
So,
dismissed that?
in terms of what we did, so we met with them maybe a month or so ago, and they did identify that when you do look on the current staffing that's on their bid and in the contract, they're truly understaffed. And that's one of the reasons why we have had the issues that we're having.
They mispriced it.
In the current year.
Yeah, they mispriced it.
So, they did.
That's
So,
my understanding, yeah.
that is our understanding. So, what we're doing, we're trying a new model where we're bringing in additional staffing at the affected school, which is primarily at Proba and at the middle school. For right now, it will be at a zero cost impact to the district, but we have to continue to evaluate that to see if it's an effective solution or not.
Thank you.
For board members, if you look in CAVE and just Google in the search bar, cleaning contract, you'll see all the documents we did review that are there.
Couple of questions. One on the additional groundskeeper.
Yep. So, as I think I explained in a collective bargaining session, but I'll explain it here to the extent it hasn't been explained already. What happened was, as you know, last year, we had some significant problems with our athletic fields, specifically Revson and the softball field at Hurlbutt. Revson was not in a state that was acceptable to anyone, and we went ahead and outsourced the maintenance of those fields in order to make them usable and acceptable. There are fundamental challenges with Revson, less so the softball field, but with Revson, that may never be completely resolved without a major capital project. But as far as getting them playable for spring, we hired professional company, and it actually switched companies, but I won't get into all that, that ultimately is able to maintain, and it's what they specialize in, these fields. Now, that field work has been union work of AFSCME for a number of years, going back until I got here, which is about 2010, at which time it was being handled by a company called Stex, which is a company in Bethel, and the town, I think town also used Stex, but we used Stex, and they did the fields. At that time, the board decided that they were going to take over Revson. The town was doing Revson through Stex because we could do a better job. And at the time, our staffing was considerably higher. We had another groundskeeper, and at the time, we added 2 what we called seasonal groundskeepers, which were 10-month positions, specifically to help address these concerns. Over the years, we reduced all those positions. So we reduced the 2 seasonal positions, were cut out of the budget, and then the groundskeeping position just wasn't filled. So we were running basically on 2 groundskeepers and a 4-person who was Rocky and now is Chuck Carboni. And we weren't in a position to do that. So the problem is it's union work. So we can't just outsource things without negotiating with the union. That's state law. There's nothing we can do about that. We negotiated. And what we were looking for is the union to agree that that work could now be outsourced. So not only the baseball fields, but all of the athletic fields could be outsourced to an outside company permanently. Now, that's not something you're going to get cheaply. That kind of, because that's multiple positions that if we had wanted to properly maintain our fields, we would have had to probably add at least 2 groundskeeper positions and maybe a seasonal or 1 and 2 seasonals. We hadn't figured that out. And if you recall, much of your groundskeeping equipment is in a state or was in a state of bad repair for numerous reasons that I discussed in a legal memo, which I'd rather not discuss publicly. But the fact is you also would have had a major investment in equipment in order to maintain the fields. So we decided to negotiate with the union. The draft MOU that was presented to the board for ratification included in that filling the groundskeeping position we had not filled the last couple of years. So that position is in the MOU and we must fill it if we're going to outsource. I would argue you have to do it anyway, but I think that could be worked out with the union if you chose to bring that work back in. Of course, the problem is if you choose to bring the work back in, you're going to have to add more than 1 groundskeeper because otherwise we can't do the fields properly. I will also add that the MOU, which is a public document and it was approved by the board unanimously, also says we only may need to maintain that groundskeeper for 3 years. So I did put a sunset on that. It doesn't mean you're not going to want to maintain it longer because we do need that work. I mean, we have been struggling with outdoor maintenance, but you do have a 3-year window. The other piece I just want to add to that is the groundskeepers are frequently used as substitutes for the custodians in the buildings. We must have custodians in the buildings. You can't run a school during the day without a custodian. It's just not something you can do. So what happens a lot is the groundskeepers are pulled into the buildings, in which case we have even less work being done on the grounds. So adding this position I think both helps the district and it's also something we gave, frankly, in return for the right to outsource. Hope that answers your question.
Mike, from an operating budget point of view, where do you see kind of our vulnerabilities? I know we struggled with a number of things over the last couple of years. Like where do you see us being vulnerable? I know there's capital items, and we can talk about that at a later date.
Right.
But what's kind of not getting done that can kind of come back and bite us?
For the most part, any of the work at the middle school that we just keep pushing off year to year, because we're not sure what's going to happen with the building. The HVAC
systems are anywhere from in the 60s to 70s. They're old, they're outdated, motors, squirrel cages, the units themselves. For the most part, my thoughts are it would just be on an HVAC level.
Is there particular schools where that's an issue?
Middle school.
For the most part, middle school.
Yes, that's where I heard.
Yeah, for the most part, it's middle school, very hard to control. Hot days, warm days, doesn't matter. There is no preference when it has issues. It works very well when it's peak of summer. It works very well when it's peak of winter. Anywhere in between, it's very tough to control. You have fresh air dampers, you have economizers which bring in fresh air to try to battle some of the overheating. You have coils that are just outdated, they're not efficient, they're not cooling off as well as they're supposed to. So it's just a number of things that just compounding at the middle school level. And middle school, for the most part, is all air handlers, there's nothing on the roof.
Yeah.
They're all in tough locations. You gotta pretty much stand on ductwork to try to work on them. It's just, you know, and little by little, we are gonna try. I have already got prices for different things, for economizers, for motors, just to get the school back to some sort of controllable state through building management or just temperatures itself.
Have we been living within our repair allowances, or have we had to take from other?
There's been some fluctuations where we had to take money, depends on what the need is.
Yeah.
So we do have to ship in the overall facilities budget just to shore up certain accounts. So we do, yes, it does fluctuate. Mike, want to speak about how often we do maintain just overall facilities?
Yeah, pretty much maintenance for HVAC. Everything is greased on a monthly basis, which is more than it needs to be. But we have some equipment that's, you know, has been neglected, whether it was in the 90s, 80s, early 2000s. So lack of maintenance means we need more maintenance as we move forward. So filters are done 2-3 times a year, depending on how much money is left back in the budget towards the end of the school year. We do belts as needed, motors as needed. We've just put in probably $7,000–8,000 worth of motors into HVAC.
In less than a month.
In less than a month. Miscellaneous school, nothing out of the ordinary. It's just something that we go through every year. This isn't lack of maintenance. This is just motors that spin. High school, you know, pretty much 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day. The school is never empty. There's always something going on. We take care of the, greasing, oiling, which is electric motors, which are electric pumps. Coils are cleaned on a 2-3 times a year basis. It's basically once one aspect of the system is cleaned, move on to the next, and it's just right back to square one. So probably quarterly, everything is taken care of, which is a little bit more than it needs to be, but we have some equipment that really needs attention all the time, so we need to have our hands on it, we need to have our eyes on it, that way we can get ahead of problems before they happen. Basically, everything that we find, we catch before a failure, but there are things that catch us that are failed, whether it's an electric motor, which could be a supply fan for an entire space, could be a return fan for an entire space, it could be a fresh air damper for an entire space, so it's maintained on a monthly basis. I have one guy specifically for all the units, that's all he does. Filters, belts, grease, oil. I have one guy who does all the boiler rooms, checking pressures, steam, blowing down boilers. So I have 2 guys that really do the general maintenance for all the schools. We have probably 150 exhaust fans, whether it's bathrooms, common spaces. So it's constant. I mean, there are things that are going to fail, that are going to be out of our control. A belt will snap, a bearing will go. But everything is taken care of. The roofs are walked, soup to nuts, everything is taken care of, monthly basis. But things do pop up and break that we're not aware of, and we have to get on it ASAP.
I think there'd be a longer discussion when we go through the capital budget, because that's really where a lot of big expenditures are in terms of over the next couple of years. But it's not gonna be, I think we're gonna need a cleanup and capital budget session, probably. I don't think we'll get through it all.
Just real quick in summary, just to make sure that I repeat what I thought I heard, to make sure that I internalize it, because I'm looking for themes in this budget, right? So what I'm hearing is there were sort of 3 drivers. One was reduced electricity credits, right?
An increase in the supply rate.
to, it seems like increased scope and cleaning, right? It's a matter of scope, so when I go back, it's, to the first year, it's about an 11% per year compounded growth each year.
It's
Right.
more than that, but I'll explain when you're finished with your
And
question.
and I don't wanna get it, just, what I'm hearing is it was it's scope.
No, that's part of it. The bigger piece of it is the wages paid to the employees, the actual employees. So the wages paid to the employees under the old contract with the $11,000 or so increase were approximately $11
Okay,
an hour.
so it's scope and
wages,
and
which is a
wages
much bigger part of it.
as part of these bid outs that you did.
That's correct. The increase of this year to next year
Yeah.
is scope.
Yeah.
The increase of last year to this year is wages.
And then lastly, on the Revson piece, it seems that, we outsourced it, right, which, if we would have kept it in, it would have, resulted in an increase, a bigger increase than if we outsourced it.
If we staffed appropriately, yes.
So it's
If we had-
doomed if you do,
yes.
doomed if you don't type of scenario.
That's correct. It's cheaper. It
So
turned out
that's
it's
why
cheaper
when
to
I think
outsource.
even we've gotten, questions from the public on this, it's important to articulate, and it's a little bit hard to get your arms around it as you see the different pieces.
Yes.
But I think, if I summarize, those are the three things that happened.
Good? Good. Let's move the technology.
Is it okay if Mike?
Yeah.
Mike,
Let's see, like.
Yes, yes, we'll hang out.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm good at this one, you said.
Yeah.
Fresh water.
15.
Happy to report that middle school plumbing issue is taken care of.
And it was clean, fresh water.
Yes.
I heard that
Fresh.
muttered over here. Fresh water, clean water problem. Not another kind of problem.
So we're moving to digital
Technology. Yeah.
Do you want me to start by answering the questions?
I mean, I kind of had more of a general question, maybe that might be a good way to start with Craig. I think, I'm just wondering when you look at, the budget as a whole, and, there's certainly a lot of line items in here, as there would be, of course, when you're talking about all these different programs and things. But, maybe you could just speak generally to how you see technology in the district, and particularly in terms of innovation and how that's built into the budget. Like, how did you come up with a budget for technology? Kind of just
So the
starting.
process for creating the technology budget actually starts with receiving input from the curriculum instruction leaders and the school technology teams. So the items that go into it, whether it be software or hardware, outside of the generic IT-related stuff for viruses, servers, internet, and so forth, actually start by looking at curriculum instruction. So one of the things that we do particularly well is the partnership between technology and curriculum instruction, so that we are driven by the needs of the classroom rather than a top-down IT need. So I guess, and then I'll sort of weave through some of the questions that were asked, I think. So like if you consider the software account,
Page number?
that's an excellent question.
Or a line?
Yeah.
Software is on the 6,000.
Yeah, it's on, page
Okay,
114.
Yeah, and I guess the printout of all the items start on 115.
Yeah.
So the way the software account begins is we first go back to the instructional leaders as well as the IT department, and we review all of the software that was in use and whether it would continue to be in use. So on the software account that you're looking at for this year, there is actually 17 items that were removed in comparisons to last year. So sort of the first phase of that account's budgeting process is to look at whether or not the program needs to be used, should be continue to be used, and if it is licensed correctly. From there, we actually go to then looking at pricing estimates. So the one problem that we do run into, particularly with this account, is many of our vendors will not commit to pricing for July 1st of next year when we create the budget, which would have been in October and November just passed. So in where we have exact quotes and vendors that will commit to pricing, we use that exact number when we price. At the time when we have a vendor that does not provide us a price, we currently use a 5% increase because that has been, since the implementation of Connecticut's data privacy law, that has been about the range of increases we've been seeing in software, especially software that contains student information. I guess
if the list of programs went down by 17.
No, 17 were removed. That doesn't, there's also new additions that have been put in.
I was just gonna say, 17 were removed, and how many were added? How did we net out on software programs?
Well, so I can tell you what the big drivers of software are. So if you figure out where I just shoved a piece of paper I wrote on. So software shows a $57,073 change, which is the summary that comes from page 114. $36,900 of that is actually an account transfer, and you would see the offset of that on page 112 for account 3309.
What does that mean, account transfer?
The expenses were allocated to the wrong account previously, so we moved
Oh, I
them
see.
to the correct
Gotcha,
account.
gotcha. Yeah.
There is new IT-related expenses of $16,604. Those focus on the implementation of a new backup system called for our district data, especially with the most recent experiences we've had last year with viruses and the vulnerability of school districts being more of a target for viruses. We were looking to put in a new backup system in both the town and the schools to prevent data loss, because we do have an obligation to ensure the retention of student information and data related to students for upwards of 50 years after graduation.
And some of that's in the town budget, I'm assuming?
The town's portion is in the town's budget.
Yeah.
There is $13,594 of instructional software requests. They range from a science program to Newsella, which was a program originally purchased by the PTO for the middle school this year, and after the initial purchase, if continued by the district, would transfer into the school district's budget. And then a music program that has been postponed for a number of years, but has now caused the music software to no longer be supportable. So that's been put in so that it can be updated and is in use with our music classes in terms of being able to allow them to design their own music. And lastly, there is, I reversed those numbers. That should have been 14,519 for instructional software. And then it's actually 13,594 is for non-instructional software. And that is specific to a request to support onboarding and automation of the HR department. You can identify software in the list that's new because in parentheses at the end of it says new.
But, when we kind of look at the, this big story really is around software and equipment, right? And the question really is more about how, what are some ways that we can find efficiencies around those categories?
Yep.
What are things we can do? I think that's really going to be, we understand how much everything costs, but what can we do, if anything, anything to get these costs down?
So software is, the largest portion of software comes from, working with curriculum and instruction. So it would be going back and having those conversations to determine, what programs, could be used in a different fashion, or if programs of a model that they refer to as open educational resources, which means free, are able to and of the quality that Weston would want to use.
Yeah, is free software of the, generally just not up to, the quality that we would use here?
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes you have, more, ads and things as part of that, but we have some, there's some really good ones out there. Common Lit is one of them, but there are other resources that, particularly, look at examples like in math, the Dreambox tool, which has been a good instructional tool. It's expensive, compared to others that are out there. It's one that is aligned with our program. But the free ones, it's hit or miss. You think about the one in music. The one we use in music that kids go home and practice their instruments with. So there really isn't a free equivalent to that, for that level of personalization. We did go back and talk to Sills last year to do some trimming around the edge. We certainly can go into a more intensive process again this year, but I think in terms of the philosophical approach could be moving more towards free tools, but there is a trade-off there.
And what about the consulting services? I mean, going from 2 years ago when we spent $18,000 on consulting services that are obviously there to support this complex softwares that we use and platforms that we have that are, useful, to $145,000. And when where I really want go ahead, and then I'll ask myself.
So there are offsets to that account, because
Yeah.
we contract with a company called Novus for both the town and the police department. So on the revenue page, there is revenue that comes in that are offsets to that. So if I remember correctly, the portion of that account that is ours is 87,000. And what that is the outsourcing of our network infrastructure, so that it isn't housed internally within our network, as well as it is maintained by an off-site individual or individuals. That was done. There was a reduction in, I believe it was 3 years ago now, when we reduced the network administrator position from the department. So what that is the reduction of that network administrator position, attempting to work with a more limited staff to keep everything up and running, and having experienced both a virus and other hardware network related issues, and would think any of the principals could talk to the difference between what we experienced last year in terms of network related issues compared to this year. And a lot of that was because we did not have the staff to maintain everything that was necessary because of the previous cut. So that was brought back as mitigation to keep everything here both outsourced and not cause an increase in staff or FTE count. But that's where that comes from. And that was done across the town. So we contracted across the town with that group.
So you're saying having an on-site staff person would have prevented viruses and all the network problems you had, and the money that you paid to have that outsourced did not do the trick?
No.
That's a loaded question.
No, but
Load
the
that?
timing, no, the
No, but
timing
that's
of
what I
that is
heard.
wrong, so I didn't say it correctly.
Okay.
So we eliminate the position.
Yep.
We maintain with a lower staff with the issues. We then contract with this company
I
to
see.
correct the issues. So
I
that's-
see.
I must have said it wrong.
No, that's okay. So you didn't have the outside contract people in place.
No, we only began working with them
Gotcha.
in May-ish.
Okay.
I know we're short.
It's two specific software questions. Munis, are we cloud-based now?
Yes.
And is this almost $80,000 annual for that? And is that our portion? Are we sharing with the town?
No, that's also has revenue that comes in from the town.
Okay. But is that the full?
That's the full, we
price.
budget, yeah,
We
under.
budget the full price.
The previous finance director preferred that we budget the full on our side and then the
portion of that
revenue.
is in that reimbursement from the town. And then is the same true for rec track? Is the 12,000 the full cost to
It's both the full cost and an initial implementation. The working with Parks and Rec, they would prefer that Rec Track be moved to the cloud-based program. So there's actually additional costs in that line because it will be the initial implementation year in July. So there's an installation cost that will then drop off.
Do we know how much that is? Like, how much is rec track costing us?
I'm pretty sure I don't have that written down in anywhere here to fumble through it right now.
I mean, because I was
But
just
I
trying to
think the
get on
installation cost was like $3,000 for the first year, and then it goes back.
Okay.
But that's also has revenue from the town.
I know we're short on time, so, my last question is just, I think when we talked about a lot in the previous meeting about kind of like the organizational structure and understanding how these departments are set up, and, you know, I look at this chart, and, you are just by yourself. And I know from this that you have 8 FTE under you, so it would be very helpful for me to, I think probably others, just because we don't really have much visibility into how your group works, if we could understand, you know, who's under you and how they're working. Are they school-based? Are they, you don't have to answer this now, I mean, when you guys are putting together the org chart, so I would love like a job description or some kind of analysis or understanding of what all these people are
Right,
doing.
well, what we could do is we could do an organization chart for the technology department with a basic description of what the different roles, because they are different. But some of them are union, some of them are non-union.
Yeah, and Tabby's adding maybe the salaries, I think might be somewhere else or attached.
Just broken out would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So, what I wanna
Thank
do is try to stop it here. We're still gonna have to do another session on the capital budget, because that's gonna be a longer session. And so what I would like to do probably is clean up a few of the other tabs and then go right into the capital budget, because that's gonna require a whole session anyway. What I'd like to do is maybe just go around a little bit to, get, others' reflections on what other big information that they need, because I definitely wanna start the board thinking about solutions. And so, but it may require, answering some other questions. So this is an attempt to prioritize the existing questions that are out there, so that we kind of get to the bigger, more important ones first. And so maybe let me start, yeah.
Yeah, I think my question to Craig is one that I feel we've talked about as a group. I think a little bit more universally, like really understanding the org chart of the district with job descriptions, and salaries.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and
That's, yeah, go ahead.
This is where I think that question comes from, and I think when you look at the various tabs, right, and you separate the number of headcount actually in the school versus the headcount that is in the administrative bucket, you basically, out of the 364 proposed headcount, 193 are in the schools, but there's 170 that are somewhere like here, right?
Sounds not right, but maybe you're right.
Yeah, I mean, if you just add up the
Certainly not
tabs.
in our offices.
Just add up the tabs, I mean, add up the tabs.
No, I understand, but
Yeah.
a lot of those positions are going to be, okay. I just wanna understand what you need, because.
So I guess the question is on some of these, and I don't think on all of them, but I think the question comes, especially if there's a specific area where people wanna understand, the depth of the org chart. I don't propose you do it for everything, but for example, in technology, there's a question, and if there's anywhere else.
That we can do, that's not a problem. I think so for instance, there's only so much time.
Yeah,
I mean, you may have noticed that in emailing, doing it, I mean, there's all
Right,
kinds
right.
of things that
Yeah.
have to happen. So creating a breakdown of positions and what area they're in, we can do that. That I can do.
Yeah.
Creating, so, and as I mentioned in our last meeting, so there are job descriptions and then there are job descriptions. Some of them exist, and some of them really need to be updated because they reflect a lot of change. So written job descriptions that's a bigger piece of work. As far as where those 170 whatever positions are, that we can figure out for you. And that I can, and create it in a hierarchical, you got that right.
I honestly, if others need it, I don't need it, I could do my work without that,
How about
but,
the first crack, the best you can do, and then we'll
Sure.
look and see if.
I think that would be great.
Certainly, I think
Right.
if you're putting down a title of somebody, you can put a few words around what exactly you're doing.
Absolutely, that we can do. I mean, so what happens is so how deep do you wanna go with that? So the chart's the chart, we can take
I
everything out
wanna
of the
go
buildings.
through, when I get to the tabs in the binder, and I see FTE headcounts under any of these blue in the first line,
Okay,
then I'd like to know who those FTE,
okay, that can be done,
think that would be
that's good, and
including an admin.
a title position, like you just asked, we could provide you with the bullets of the major areas of responsibility for that title.
That would be fantastic.
That we can do.
Yeah, and the administrative assistant.
And then if you have specific questions on a particular position, I can go deeper.
Right, then we can follow, yeah, we're
yeah.
not,
And I guess the question is, when it is a shared, obviously, everybody's
You're
in the
looking for
buildings, right?
crossover, too.
When it's a
Yeah.
shared, when it's a shared resource, whether it's a facilities resource, a technology resource, or a curriculum-related resource, when it's shared, then there's a bit, and you add up all the FTE that are quote-unquote shared, then there's a question about
Yeah.
where,
We can figure out a way to show that.
yeah.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, the other would be the fully loaded employee cost. I think I asked for that before.
You did, so we have a
Yeah.
sort of a graph, we're figuring out how to do that. So what Bill and I talked about before we went out was, sort of concentric circles. The way you would ask for it was closest to the students directly, what supports them, what supports the people supporting them and the students. So we're trying to do a total, using a graphic depiction,
Yeah.
the cost, including salaries and benefits for each group.
Okay.
And I think that should be helpful. I can make it more
Yeah, no,
simple if that's better, but I mean, it's hard to, if I do it by individual, I mean, some of us, like, I don't take that
Why
health
don't you
insurance,
just-
you don't need that, right?
I mean,
Why don't you
Just
do a
leave it
pro
at
rata, why don't you just do a pro rata by FTE, that's all?
Okay.
Just allocate out the benefits, pro rata by FTE.
That's fine.
Simple, easy,
I like that.
I think
Thank you.
that'll be more than sufficient.
that'll get you in the right,
And then-
ballpark.
Yeah, that's right. Also, the class size comparisons for K through 12 in the DIRG, I know we got them for Weston, and, we may not have, I thought we asked for it, but perhaps we didn't, but, I think that would be helpful to have. And also, I'm probably taking this one from Ruby, but the explanation that she brought up earlier from Malone and McBroom on that key slide where they talk about the growth in Weston despite the downturn in the county.
I think Bill was gonna do that, so we'll have to figure out if he's not able, we'll find a way to take that over.
And then the only thing that I was, key budget drivers, which is the detailed page for each section, yeah. And then like for the, just if you can give whatever clarity you can give around the enrollment, around SPED and 504.
Just following up, just this whole issue of parity between, theater and athletics. We had asked about the support from company, we have estimates for the support from boosters, for the support from company. And also, we have an estimate of the number of athletes we have participating, so we can kind of look at like our cost per athlete. Do we have an estimate of the number of students at Short Wharf and company that are participating? I don't wanna include Patty's production, cause she runs 150 kids out on the stage. It's a little bit of an abstract number. But, just so we can have an idea of, are we being fair to both sides of that constant debate here in Weston?
Okay, we can,
So the 200 number is inflated, you think? Because
I don't know if Patty's number's in there or not, because I didn't see Patty's
In the
stipends
summary.
in there.
No, my second for it in there.
So it's, I just wanna make sure we
Yeah, we'll
have
work on
apples
that.
to apples.
I'll set to
Are you talking in addition to this?
addition.
No, which are the priorities out of those?
Oh, I didn't realize I had to prioritize this, I thought we could get everything in.
Not, maybe, well, I'd like to, like I
Yeah,
said, I think that if we wanna have ultimately discussions around solutions sooner versus later, you probably want the ones that'll help you the most sooner, because not all of these are gonna be delivered at the same time. That's really what I was
Okay,
getting
can
at.
I send an email with how I
sure.
prioritize them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just, yeah, pick a
That's fine.
couple. Yeah, what about you, Victor, anything you
What's
want?
that, Victor?
No, I mean, I think you heard it a little bit in, I think it was Ruby's question. Broadly speaking, consulting, it made it on the list as consulting increases. We're looking for context here. So it's consulting in my mind is insourcing versus outsourcing. So I just don't think about the question narrowly, just think it broadly in terms of, you know, how do you want the board to understand the consulting support that's being asked for to be availed of, so we can put it in the context of the need.
Right, which is very, very different for SPED, for example, than it might
Right.
be for, you know, yeah.
Because the way it got transcribed to this list was just increase, and that's not gonna really help us.
Yeah, I think for me, I think Lewis hit on it, is contextualizing how we want to approach a budget adjustment, right? So how do we visualize the buckets of expenses, and so that we could actually look at them, evaluate them in the context of the impact it would have on our students, right? That requires a way of bucketing these things, or like you said, concentric circles, or some way of having a discussion which is systematic and gets us to, action implications of that action, right? So that we could, as a board, understand if we're heading in a certain direction, whether it's one where we're gonna have to do, but maybe some we may wanna do, but the implications there are too severe to do. And I think trying to do that in an efficient way will require a way of looking at this, right? And I think, Louis, you kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I was
addressed that.
focusing, just to clarify, I mean, I was focusing specifically on the salaries and benefits of the staff, but there's a bigger discussion.
But they're a
there
bigger
for that.
discussion with
Yep.
the same, I think you use that same,
And that's
the same
frequently,
way of thinking in
and
a
that's
bigger
frequently
discussion.
something boards have done.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
you've discussed, in prior boards have discussed the concept of investment and where best to put it, and can you, if there's an area that is further away as to use the
Right.
concept, is it still important? Is it still needed in order to manage this part? So but boards have talked about it in that context before.
Right, and instead of being ad hoc, it's nice to basically have some sort of a framework to work our way through that. Because sometimes these discussions become very ad hoc, and everyone's kind of piling on in different directions, and you never kind of get to this kind of systematic view of, let's step through the art of the possible and see what the implications are.
But I think you can benchmark yourself against, so yes, you're right, everything right should have at the end of the day, the academic benefit to West End. But Lisa, correct me if I'm gonna misspeak here, in the last decade, we've only been a blue ribbon high school once, and that was in 2013.
Well, there's a limit to how often you can do that.
Okay, but just hear my thought process.
Okay.
We became a blue ribbon school
Right.
with more students, fewer faculty, and $10 million less in budget, right? I'm just.
Yes, it wasn't the only time though that I thought that was the only time we were a blue ribbon. We were a blue ribbon back in the 90s, just so.
Okay, but so my thought is that since then, we have added and added and added. So I think the bigger question is, when we keep adding every single year, you're gonna compound and you're gonna almost lose sight of the inefficiencies that are happening under the cover, right? And so between 2013 and now, what is the academic benefit that we have achieved, or what are those milestones? And listen, it's not whether it's a 1% or if it's a 5%. Who cares? Not who cares, but it is what is at the end of the day the academic benefit that we are receiving to this town. I don't believe that we can cut the whole child. No, totally. I don't. There, the saying's out there, right? You can't cut yourself to greatness. Of course, Weston cannot cut themselves to greatness. But what I'm saying is that what were the efficiencies back then that made our district so great, that took our district to a blue ribbon caliber, and what's transpired since then?
I want to clarify something, because when you say added and added, we haven't added and added. We've actually eliminated a lot of positions since 2013. Teachers, facilities, administration. I mean, we've made significant changes. What's added is money. But money isn't driven necessarily by adding people. Money is driven by salary increases, insurance cost increases, special education increases. So we haven't added, the high school's added a couple key positions. You clearly have added the college and career counselor. We put in the writing center since then. I mean, there've been some improvements, but district-wide, there's been a lot of cutting as far as staff go. So that's not entirely accurate. I just want to clarify that. What we have added is money, but that's mostly driven by, I mean, if you look at our budget increases over the last several years, they've been really low, other than last year and this year.
To that point, Louis, the figure I used at the last meeting was over the last 10 years, it's averaged a 1.9% increase. If you take out last year, it's been, for 9 years, 1.7% increase, which is below the inflation rate. We have found in savings 10 years ago was through transportation, going from a 3 to a 2-tier system, through energy, and through a variety of ways. And as Louis said, we have we have also seen new programs and services come through, but also the key factor is education has become more complex as well. And I think when you look at special ed, that's a big area that has become more complex.
That's where the staffing increases have been.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think, Louis, to your point, when you actually dig in, you'll see the reallocation of resources, but the town, when the community kind of looks at high level, what they see is the total FTE count has been pretty steady, right?
Right.
Well,
it's steady because of addition, so it's just like what we were talking about earlier, technology. It's we've cut a lot of things, but we've had to add paras for special education. We increased our PPS system.
And so when they this is a question that I think we need to answer, because once, I think the community, and at least the feedback that I've gotten is that their community is very receptive to supporting education in the way we've supported it in the past. I think what they're looking for is to see where, have we created the efficiencies, have we created our own capacity before we spend another tax dollar? Have we created enough? Have we really got to ground and created the capacity that we need to create? And I think that's just a matter of just making sure that we explain this. We have a story, we explain the story, we show where we've created capacity to reinvest in the things that are important to us before we ask the community for another tax dollar. I think that's really the thing. It's not that there's solely pressure to just reduce for reduction's sake. I think it goes hand in hand with understanding where we've created capacity and whether it makes sense to invest the additional dollars.
And at the high school, where Ruby, your question was specifically to the high school, I mean, if you look at it, the high school has had the fewest reductions other than things that are based on enrollment or interest in particular sections. Yeah. So we've actually added a little there. As I said, the college and career counselor, the writing center was changed. It's a science program, the science research program. So to the extent there were efficiencies back in 2013, it's that those programs didn't exist, or didn't exist in the same format, I should say. So it's not like it was that different. There's just these new programs. They can with no
college and career
Yeah. Now, we're probably gonna have to have another session on, can we do it Wednesday? I know this curriculum.
That's it.
We wanna postpone our curriculum meeting, Katie?
Well, we need to do a project challenge issue.
Well,
Right after?
I would just have to do, I'm out from 12 to 5 for,
Okay.
a meeting,
Yeah.
seminar meeting up at Shipman Goodwin.
is Thursday possible?
I have to go to that.
Pushing.
You know, it could be, I probably can't do Thursday.
And Wednesday, I'm just gonna say it again, can we postpone our curriculum meeting?
I think we can,
Meaning, how pressing is it that it be this week instead of next week?
I think it's, trying to be parallel to this process, to
Yeah.
have another opportunity for discussion.
Yeah.
But in terms of posting, we would have to post that
If-
workshop
today's Monday, right?
Right.
So, if it's Wednesday morning, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
So the latest would be tomorrow morning, preferably this afternoon.
And honestly, I think it's predominantly, whoever needs to be here to discuss, predominantly it's the capital budget.
Oh, good.
Plus, the other tabs that are,
Okay.
that you can look through, but it's mostly readdressing the insurance issue, the district-wide tab, right, that we have to discuss, but odds and ends there.
Okay, good.
But look at, who, not everyone, I think, for the capital budget needs to be present, I don't think.
Could we carry on with the curriculum budget then, and you do the workshop? No.
No.
You need to be here.
You
So,
need to be
I
there.
agree.
I'll work with you, Hillary and Gina, to figure out a date.
Perfect.
Okay, so
So we're
try
doing
9 o'clock on Wednesday?
So
Ruby,
we'll
one
reschedule, just to summarize, we'll reschedule curriculum. This meeting will, Wednesday, 9 to
11?
11. We're getting shorter.
That's optimistic.
Gotta keep squeezing it down.
Ruby, I just wanted to say, I was trying to pull it up, I couldn't find the blue ribbon application. I'd be happy to go back and reread it.
Wait, we have to officially adjourn.
Oh, yes, motion to adjourn? Okay, meeting adjourned.
What we have already got.
Right.
Sorry.
I will go back and read it.
There's a lot more building.
Yeah, those are extras, these are Dan's, those are extras.
Yes,
In the library.
yeah.
I gotta say here,